The day I lost everything started like any other Tuesday at Bradley's bakery. The bell chimed as customers filed in for their morning coffee and pastries, the aroma of fresh-baked bread filling the air. I had no idea my husband was about to destroy 15 years of my family's hard work in less than 15 minutes. I'm Tatum, and until that morning, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Morning, sunshine. Darren's voice carried across the bakery as he strolled in, pristine suit and perfect smile intact. He kissed my cheek, but something felt off. The way he glanced around the shop, like he was cataloguing every detail. "You're here early," I said, sliding a tray of croissants into the display case. "Thought you had that big meeting today." "Oh, I do." He drummed his fingers on the counter. "Actually, that's why I'm here. Your dad around?" Before I could answer, Dad emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting his apron. "Darren, good to see you, son." What happened next plays in my mind like a slow-motion car crash. Darren pulled out a stack of papers, speaking in that smooth voice he used to close deals. "So, I've been looking over the bakery's finances, and I think I've found a solution to your cash flow problems." Dad's face fell. "What cash flow problems?" "The ones I discovered while reviewing your books." Darren's smile never wavered. "You gave me access last month, remember? For that loan application." The rolling pin I was holding clattered to the floor. "What loan application?" "Honey, this is business talk," Darren said, not even looking at me. "Your father and I have been discussing options." "Like hell you have." I stepped between them, but Dad grabbed my arm. "Tatum, wait. Maybe we should hear him out." The next 10 minutes were a blur of legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. Darren had somehow convinced my father that we were on the brink of bankruptcy, which was news to me, considering I handled most of our accounting. He presented a rescue package that would save the bakery, requiring only that we sign over controlling interest to his company, Artemis Eateries. "This is insane," I said, scanning the documents. "Dad, we're not in financial trouble. He's lying." Actually, Darren pulled out another paper. "You are. The health department found several violations last week. Major ones. They're threatening to shut you down." My blood ran cold. "We passed inspection 3 weeks ago." Funny how things change. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the real Darren, calculating, cold, victorious. "You did this," I whispered. "You set us up." "I'm trying to help," he said loudly, for Dad's benefit. "Without this deal, you'll lose everything. With it, you keep working here. Same as always, just under better management." Dad's hand shook as he reached for the pen. "We don't have a choice, do we?" "Dad, no." I grabbed his arm. "He's stealing our bakery." "I'm saving it," Darren corrected. "Sign here, please." I watched in horror as my father signed away our legacy. The bakery my grandparents had opened in 1962, where I'd learned to bake my first cookie, where Mum had worked until the day she died, gone with a few strokes of a pen. Darren gathered the papers, tucking them into his briefcase. "I'll have my team here this afternoon to begin the transition. Don't worry, you'll both still have jobs. For now." The bell chimed again as he left, leaving behind the scent of his expensive cologne and the ruins of my life. Dad slumped against the counter, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "What have I done?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. I was already pulling out my phone, calling Avery, my best friend, and the only lawyer I knew. "He can't do this," I said when she picked up. "There has to be a way to fight it." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she promised. "Don't sign anything else." But it was too late. By the time Avery arrived, Darren's legal team had already taken control. Within a week, Dad was retired, with a pittance of a severance package, and I was informed my services were no longer required. The final twist of the knife came that night when I returned home to find Darren packing his bags. "You understand, right?" He didn't even look guilty. "It's just business, nothing personal." I stood in our bedroom doorway watching him fold his designer shirts. "How long have you been planning this?" Does it matter? He zipped his suitcase. You were never going to be enough, Tatum. The bakery was just the beginning. I'm building an empire. He brushed past me, then paused. Oh, and I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. Try not to make it messy. The front door clicked shut, and I sank to the floor, my world imploding around me. But somewhere in the midst of my tears, something else began to burn. Determination. Darren thought he'd broken me, but he'd just lit a fire. I pulled out my phone again, this time calling Valeria, the restaurateur who'd been trying to hire me for months. Still interested in teaching me the business? I asked when she answered. Always, she said. Why? I smiled through my tears. Because I'm going to need to know everything about running restaurants. Every single thing. You're holding the knife wrong, Valeria said, adjusting my grip for the 100th time. A chef's knife is an extension of your arm, not a weapon. 6 months had passed since I'd lost the bakery, and here I was, starting from scratch in Valeria's upscale Manhattan restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from master baker to kitchen novice overnight. Sorry, I muttered, repositioning my fingers. Old habits. Speaking of old habits, Valeria leaned against the prep station. Your ex-husband's new acquisition is making waves. Did you see the article in the Times? My knife slipped, nearly taking off a fingertip. No, I've been avoiding the news. Smart girl, but you should know he's expanding, buying up small restaurants, turning them into chain concepts. People are calling him the fast casual king of New York. I focused on dicing onions, letting their sting excuse the tears in my eyes. Good for him? No, Valeria grabbed my wrist, forcing me to look at her. Not good for him. Good for you. Every empire has weak spots, Tatum. You just need to learn where to look. A commotion from the dining room interrupted us. Chef! One of the servers burst into the kitchen. Levi Hoffman is here again. Valeria cursed under her breath. Third time this week. He's trying to poach my staff. Levi Hoffman, I asked. Rising star in the restaurant world. Aggressive expansion, but quality-focused. Unlike your ex. She straightened her chef's coat. Stay here. Learn something. But I followed her anyway, curious about this rival restaurateur. Through the kitchen door, I watched Valeria approach a tall man in an impeccable suit who was chatting with one of her line cooks. Levi, Valeria's voice could have frozen hell. This is getting old. He turned, flashing a disarming smile. Valeria, just having a friendly chat with your talented staff. My staff isn't interested in your offers. Actually, the line cook interrupted, I was considering... Marcus, Valeria's tone left no room for argument. Back to work. As Marcus skulked away, Levi's eyes landed on me. New face? Off limits, Valeria snapped. I don't know, I stepped forward, ignoring Valeria's warning look. I might be interested in hearing an offer. Levi's eyebrows shot up. Really? And you are? Tatum, former owner of Bradley's Bakery. Recognition flickered across his face. Ah, Darren's ex. Heard about that mess. He studied me more carefully. Interesting career change. Necessary one, I corrected. Your turn. Why are you really here? He glanced at Valeria, then back to me. Coffee, there's a place around the corner. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Levi in a quiet cafe, watching him doctor his espresso with precise amounts of sugar and cream. So, he said, you're learning the restaurant business to get back at Darren. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He leaned back. Look, I respect revenge as much as the next person, but you're going about it wrong. I'm not. Save it. He pulled out his phone, showing me a spreadsheet. Darren's expanding too fast, taking on too much debt. His concepts are flashy, but shallow. In 18 months, maybe 24, it'll all start falling apart. I stared at the numbers. How do you know this? Because I've been watching him, waiting. Levi's smile turned predatory. And now I'm wondering if you'd like to help speed up the process. Why would you want my help? Because you know his weaknesses, and because watching him lose everything to his ex-wife would be... He sipped his coffee. Poetic. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Avery. Turn on the news now. Levi noticed my expression change. Problem? I pulled up a news site, and there it was. Artemis Eateries announces IPO plans. Darren Holmes set to take company public. Well, Levi said, reading over my shoulder, that changes things. How so? Because now there's a clock ticking. Once he goes public, taking him down becomes much harder. He pulled out a business card. I'm offering you a job, Tatum. Real responsibility, real learning opportunity. But you need to decide fast. I thought about Valeria, who'd given me a chance when I needed it most. I can't just... Yes, you can. He stood up. Call me by tomorrow if you want in. Oh, and Tatum. He paused at the door. The knife skills will come. Focus on learning the business side. That's where wars are really won. I sat there long after he left, turning his card over in my hands. Finally, I called Valeria. He offered you a job, didn't he? She said before I could speak. Yes. She sighed. Take it. Levi's an ass, but he's brilliant at business, and that's what you need right now. You're not mad? Mad? Honey, I'm proud. You're finally thinking like a shark instead of a minnow. She paused. Just promise me one thing? What's that? When you take Darren down, make it spectacular. Some of us will want front row seats. I smiled, already dialing Levi's number. That's a promise I intend to keep. You're not going to believe this. Avery burst into my office at Levi's restaurant group, waving her tablet. Artemis Eateries is in trouble. I looked up from the financial reports I'd been studying for the past year. What kind of trouble? The delicious kind. She perched on my desk, pulling up an article. Their IPO filing revealed some interesting numbers. Their growth isn't what Darren's been claiming. 3 of their newest locations are hemorrhaging money. Show me. I grabbed the tablet, scanning the figures. After 18 months working under Levi, I could read between the lines of financial statements. What I saw made me smile. Their debt-to-equity ratio is insane, I muttered. He's been borrowing against future earnings that don't exist. Exactly. Avery grinned. The stock price is tanking before they even go public. Investors are pulling out. My phone buzzed, Levi calling. Did you see? I asked when I picked up. Get to my office, now. 10 minutes later, I sat across from Levi, watching him pace. This is our moment, he said. Darren's vulnerable. His investors are spooked. He needs a white knight. And you want to be that knight? He stopped pacing. No, I want you to be. I blinked. What? Think about it. You've learned every aspect of this business. You've turned around 3 failing restaurants in the past year. Your name carries weight now. But I don't have that kind of capital. No, he sat down, sliding a folder across his desk. But I do, and I'm willing to back you. I opened the folder to find acquisition papers. You want me to buy Artemis Eateries? I want us to buy it together. You'll be the face of the deal. I'll be the silent partner. You get controlling interest. I get a healthy return on investment. He leaned forward. Plus, I get to watch Darren Holmes sell his company to his ex-wife. That's worth the price of admission alone. My hands shook as I read the terms. This is real? Very, but we need to move fast. Word is Darren's meeting with other potential buyers next week. I pulled out my phone, dialing Avery. How quickly can you review an acquisition proposal? Give me an hour, she said after I explained the situation. And Tatum, this is it. This is your chance. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Levi's team worked around the clock, preparing our offer. Finally, we were ready. Remember, Levi said as we walked into the Artemis Eateries headquarters, let me do the talking. You're just here as my restaurant operations expert. The conference room was packed with executives, lawyers, and one very nervous-looking Darren. He did a double take when he saw me. What is she doing here? He demanded. Ms. Bradley is my chief operations officer, Levi said smoothly. Her experience in restaurant turnarounds is crucial to our proposal. I sat silently, watching Darren squirm as Levi presented our offer. It was generous enough to be tempting, but structured to give us complete control. "This is ridiculous," Darren interrupted halfway through. "We have other interested parties." "Who?" Levi asked. "The Singapore group that pulled out yesterday? Or the private equity firm that's lowballing you?" He smiled. "Face it, Darren, we're your best option." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Holmes, he's right. We need to consider this offer seriously." The meeting dragged on for hours. I watched Darren's facade crack bit by bit as his board members and lawyers increasingly sided with our proposal. Finally, they called for a brief recess. Darren cornered me in the hallway. "What are you playing at?" "Playing? I'm not playing anything. I'm doing business." I met his gaze steadily. "Isn't that what you taught me? It's nothing personal." His face reddened. "You think you can run my company?" "Better than you have." I stepped closer. "Your books are a mess, Darren. Your concepts are stale. You've been so focused on expansion that you forgot about quality, just like you did with the bakery. The bakery was failing. The bakery was fine until you fabricated health violations and manipulated my father." I kept my voice low, controlled. "You wanted an empire? Congratulations. You built one on sand and now it's crumbling." The board members filed back in before he could respond. I took my seat, watching as they announced their decision to accept our offer, pending final negotiations. Levi shook hands with everyone while I gathered my papers. As we left, I paused at the door. "Oh, Darren," I turned back. "Don't worry, I'll have my lawyer contact you about the transition. Try not to make it messy." Outside, Levi burst out laughing. "That was beautiful. Did you see his face?" But I wasn't celebrating yet. "We still have to turn these restaurants around." "We will." He hailed a cab. "But first, we're going to celebrate. Dinner at Valeria's?" I nodded, finally allowing myself to smile. "Perfect. I hear she makes an excellent revenge dish, served cold." "All rise." The boardroom fell silent as I walked in, heels clicking against the polished floor. 30 pairs of eyes followed me to the head of the table. Executives, managers, and district supervisors of Artemis Eateries, all waiting to meet their new CEO. "Good morning," I said, remaining standing. "I'm Tatum Bradley. As of 9 a.m. today, I'm your new chief executive." A murmur rippled through the room. I spotted Darren at the far end, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He was required to stay on as a consultant during the transition, a detail I'd specifically requested in the contract. "Let's address the elephant in the room," I continued. "Yes, I'm Darren's ex-wife. No, this isn't about revenge." I paused. "This is about survival. Your jobs, this company's future, depend on what happens in the next 6 months." I clicked through my presentation, displaying graphs of plummeting profits and rising costs. "These numbers tell a story. It's not a happy one." "With all due respect," a middle-aged manager interrupted, "we've been hitting our growth targets." "Through unsustainable expansion and cost-cutting," I finished for him. "When was the last time you ate at one of our restaurants, Mark?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Last month." "Try again. Our records show you haven't used your employee meal benefit in over 6 months. Neither have most of you." I looked around the room. "You don't eat at your own restaurants. That's problem number 1. Darren stood up. "This is absurd. Our concepts are—" "Failing," I cut him off. "Sit down, Darren. You're here to observe, not speak." The room tensed as we stared each other down. Finally, he sat, his face flushed with anger. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "Every executive in this room will spend the next week working in our restaurants. Front of house, back of house, every position. You'll eat every item on the menu. You'll talk to customers. Then we'll meet again." "That's not in our contracts," someone protested. "Your contracts are being revised. Those who don't wish to participate can submit their resignations by end of day." The room erupted in whispers. I waited them out. "One more thing," I added. "We're reopening Bradley's Bakery." Now Darren did jump up. "You can't do that. The lease?" "The lease transferred with the acquisition." I smiled. You really should read contracts more carefully, Darren. Meeting adjourned. I gathered my papers as the room cleared out, executives muttering among themselves. Darren lingered, waiting until we were alone. You're going to destroy everything I built, he said. No, I'm going to fix what you broke. I met his eyes. Starting with the bakery. This is about your father, isn't it? This is about doing business right. I walked to the door, then turned back. By the way, you start at the downtown Brooklyn location tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. The manager there runs a tight ship. I'm not working in a restaurant kitchen. Then clear out your office by 5. I checked my watch. I have another meeting. Don't be late tomorrow. In the elevator, my hands finally started shaking. Avery was waiting in my new office. How'd it go? She asked. About as expected. I collapsed into my chair. Half of them will probably quit. Good. Fresh blood is exactly what you need. She handed me a coffee. Your father called, by the way. He saw the news about the bakery. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He wants to meet. Says he has some ideas about the reopening. Tears pricked at my eyes. Dad hadn't baked since the day we lost the bakery. Tell him yes, whenever he wants. My phone buzzed. Levi texting, watching the stock price climb. Well done, partner. Another buzz. Valeria. Dinner tonight. We need to celebrate properly. A knock at the door interrupted my replies. Jennifer, Darren's sister, stood there looking uncertain. Can we talk? She asked. I gestured to a chair. Of course. Avery excused herself as Jennifer sat down. I know Darren hurt you, she said, but these people, their jobs, are safer with me than they were with him, I finished. I'm not here to destroy the company, Jennifer. I'm here to save it. By forcing executives to work in kitchens. By reminding everyone what this business is really about. Food, service, people. I leaned forward. Stay. Help me fix this. You've always seen the problems your brother couldn't. She studied me for a long moment. The bakery. Will you really reopen it? Come see for yourself. I stood up. I'm heading there now to check on renovations. Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. Okay, show me. As we rode to Brooklyn, I thought about all the pieces falling into place. The bakery would rise again, but this time as the heart of something bigger, something better. Darren had taught me about empire building, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson. Empires built on greed collapse. Empires built on quality endure. Tomorrow, Darren would learn that lesson the hard way, starting with a 6 a.m. shift in his own failing restaurant. Is this live? I asked, staring at my phone screen where a viral video was playing. It showed Darren, still in his expensive suit, having a meltdown in one of our restaurant kitchens. Oh, it's live, Avery confirmed, barely containing her glee. And trending, our restaurant Karen is currently number 3 on Twitter. In the video, Darren was red-faced, jabbing his finger at a teenage line cook. Do you know who I am? I built this company. Sir, the cook replied calmly, the dishes still need to be washed. Company policy says everyone helps during rush hour. I'm not touching those dishes. Get a dishwasher. We're short-staffed because corporate cut our labor budget last month. Your policy, sir. I watched as Darren stormed out, knocking over a stack of clean plates in the process. The video ended with the line cook looking directly at the camera and deadpanning. Thanks, corporate. 3 million views and counting, Avery said. The comments are brutal. My phone rang. Jennifer. Have you seen? I'm watching it now, I said. He's completely lost it. He's at my apartment ranting about how you set him up. I didn't set up anything. He did this to himself. I paused. Is he drinking? Yeah. And he's talking about going to the press, exposing some truth about you. I smiled. Perfect. Let him. Perfect. Tatum, what are you planning? Just make sure he stays angry, and keep recording if he says anything interesting. After hanging up, I turned to Avery. Time for phase 2. She nodded, pulling out a folder. The audit results came back. You're going to love this. 2 hours later, I sat in my office with a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. These documents show systematic mismanagement under the previous leadership, I explained, sliding over the audit reports. Cost-cutting that compromised food safety, labor law violations, even evidence of supplier kickbacks. The reporter's eyes widened as she read. This is comprehensive. We're implementing immediate changes, I continued, starting with restoring proper staffing levels and quality standards. The previous management's focus on rapid expansion led to these issues. Speaking of previous management, she looked up. Your ex-husband's video is causing quite a stir. Yes, it's unfortunate, but it illustrates exactly why we're making these changes. Every executive is required to work in our restaurants now. Some are adapting better than others. And the bakery reopening, that's your family's original business, correct? It is. We're returning to our roots: quality food, fair treatment of workers, sustainable growth. I smiled. Would you like to see it? The renovation is almost complete. The bakery was buzzing with activity when we arrived. Dad was there, supervising the installation of new ovens. This is where it all started, he told the reporter, pride evident in his voice. And where it's starting again, thanks to my daughter. The reporter scribbled notes as Dad showed her around, explaining our vision for combining traditional baking with modern restaurant concepts. I stepped outside to take a call from Levi. Your ex is on CNBC right now, he said, making a complete fool of himself. I pulled up the live stream. Darren was sweating under the studio lights, his tie askew. She's destroying everything, he was saying. She's turned my own sister against me. She's spreading lies. Mr. Holmes, the anchor interrupted, your former company's stock has risen 15% since Ms. Bradley took over. The market seems to approve of her changes. The market doesn't understand. He stopped, seeming to realize how he sounded. This is a personal vendetta. Is that why you're here instead of working your scheduled shift at your former restaurant? The anchor's tone was devastating. We have reports you walked out mid-service, leaving your staff short-handed. I ended the stream, turning back to the bakery. Through the window, I could see Dad teaching the reporter how to properly shape a croissant, his hands moving with the confidence I remembered from childhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. He's completely melting down, talking about leaving the country. Don't let him, I replied. The board still has questions about those supplier contracts he signed. Another buzz. Valeria this time. Just saw CNBC. Karma's a beautiful thing, isn't it? I watched Dad laugh at something the reporter said and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with revenge. This was about more than getting even. This was about rebuilding something real, something lasting. The reporter emerged, tucking away her notebook. One last question, she said. What would you say to those who claim this is just about revenge? I looked through the window again, at Dad showing a young baker how to use our old family recipes. Revenge is about destroying things, I said. This is about creating something better from the ashes. That's not revenge. That's redemption. She nodded, understanding. The story runs tomorrow. Perfect timing, I smiled, just in time for the bakery's grand reopening. And Darren's final fall from grace. The Wall Street Journal article hit like a bomb. I sat in the newly renovated Bradley's bakery, watching the fallout unfold on my laptop, while the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Board members demand investigation into former CEO's practices, one headline screamed. Restaurant empire's dark underbelly exposed, declared another. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. I ignored most calls, but answered when Jennifer's name flashed on the screen. He's gone, she said without preamble. Cleared out his apartment overnight, left his phone behind. I closed my eyes. Any idea where? Probably Dad's place in the Hamptons. He always runs there when things get bad. She paused. Tatum, I know he deserved this, but he's your brother, I finished. I get it. Do you? Because this morning's article, It's not just Darren who looks bad. Dad's reputation is ruined too. The bell above the bakery door chimed. I looked up to see Clifford, Darren's father, walking in. He looked older than his 60 years, defeated. "Jennifer, I'll call you back." Clifford stood before the counter, taking in the renovated space. "Looks different," he said finally. "Better different or worse different?" "Just different." He met my eyes. "Like everything else these days." I gestured to a table. "Coffee?" He nodded, sinking into a chair while I brought over 2 cups and a plate of fresh croissants. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "You've destroyed my family's name," he said finally. "Your son destroyed it himself. I just exposed the truth." "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "The truth is, I pushed him too hard, expected too much, made him think success was everything. I hadn't expected this. Anger, yes. Threats, probably, but not regret. You raised him to be ruthless," I said. "He learned that lesson well." "I raised him to be successful." Clifford stared into his coffee. "I never taught him to be cruel. That part—" He shook his head. "That's on him." The bakery was filling up with morning customers. I watched them line up, chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the drama unfolding at our table. "What do you want, Clifford?" "Want?" He looked around the bakery again. "I want to understand something. You've won. You've taken everything from him. Why reopen this place?" "Because this place matters." I broke a croissant in half, the buttery layers perfectly flaky. "Every recipe here has a story. Every customer is part of our community." Darren never understood that. He saw numbers, not people. "And you see both," Clifford said slowly. "That's why you're succeeding where he failed." My phone buzzed. Levi texting. "Board meeting in an hour. They want to discuss pressing charges." "Are you going to have him arrested?" Clifford asked, reading my expression. "That depends on him." I met his gaze. "The supplier kickbacks, the health code violations, those are serious charges. But if he cooperates with the investigation, tells the truth, you'd show mercy after everything? Not mercy, justice." I stood up. "Find him, Clifford. Tell him he has 24 hours to come forward voluntarily. After that, it's out of my hands." Clifford rose slowly. "You're a better person than we deserved, Tatum. This isn't about being better, it's about being right." After he left, I called Jennifer back. "Dad was just here," I said. "I know, he texted me." She sounded tired. "You're really giving Darren a chance to come clean?" "Yes, but Jennifer—" I paused. "Make sure he understands this is his last chance." "I will." She hesitated. "Thank you." I ended the call and walked behind the counter. Dad was there, teaching a new baker our signature sourdough technique. "Everything okay?" he asked, noting my expression. "I don't know." I picked up an apron. "Did I go too far?" He considered this while shaping a loaf. "Remember what Mom used to say about bread? The right amount of heat makes it rise. Too much burns it to ash." "Exactly." He smiled. "You applied just enough heat, honey. Now let's see if he rises or burns." The morning rush picked up, and I lost myself in the rhythm of the bakery, taking orders, greeting regulars, making change. This was real. This mattered. My phone buzzed again, Avery this time. "Police just called. Darren's at the station, ready to talk." I looked around the bakery, at the life and warmth filling the space that Darren had once tried to destroy. He'd thought taking it would break me. Instead, it had made me stronger, taught me the difference between revenge and justice. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," I texted back. Some things are more important than watching someone fall. I turned back to the customers, to the smell of fresh bread and coffee, to the sound of laughter and conversation. This was my empire now, built not on greed and betrayal, but on quality and community, and unlike Darren's, it would last. "He's ready to see you," the detective said, leading me down a sterile hallway to an interview room. Through the window, I could see Darren sitting alone at a table, his designer suit wrinkled, his face unshaven. "Remember," Avery whispered beside me, "let him talk. The more he says, the better our position." I nodded, took a deep breath and walked in. Darren didn't look up. "You look terrible," I said, sitting across from him. "Spending the night in a holding cell will do that." His voice was hoarse. "Happy now?" "No." I placed a file on the table. "But we can end this today if you're ready to be honest." He finally met my eyes. "Honest about what? How you orchestrated my downfall? How about we start with the health inspector you bribed to shut down the bakery?" His jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." "Actually," I pulled out a document. "He's already given a statement, along with 3 of your former suppliers who admitted to the kickback scheme." "They're lying. Are the bank records lying too?" I slid over another paper. "Or the emails, or the surveillance footage." Color drained from his face as he scanned the evidence. "How did you find it all? I learned from the best, remember? You taught me to be thorough." I leaned forward. "But unlike you, I'm offering a way out." "What way out? You've already won. Taken everything." "Sign a full confession, pay back the money you stole, testify against the others involved." I tapped the file. "Do that, and I'll recommend no jail time." He laughed bitterly. "Why would you do that?" "Because Jennifer asked me to." I watched his expression change at his sister's name. "She still believes there's something worth saving in you." The door opened and Jennifer walked in. Darren straightened immediately, trying to smooth his rumpled appearance. "Jen, you shouldn't be here." "Someone has to talk sense into you." She sat beside me. "The evidence is overwhelming, Darren. Take the deal." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Jennifer's voice cracked. "For once in your life, do the right thing." Silence filled the room. I could almost see the wheels turning in Darren's head, calculating angles, looking for escape routes. "Dad's reputation," he said finally. "This will destroy him." "Dad destroyed himself," Jennifer replied. "Just like you did. But he's ready to face it. Are you?" Darren slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Tell me something," I said. "The bakery, why? You already had success. Why did you need to take it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because you loved it more than me." The simple honesty of his answer hit me like a physical blow. "You were building this empire," he continued, "and the bakery was just this small, comfortable thing. I thought if I took it, made it part of something bigger." He shook his head. "I wanted you to see what I could create. Instead, you destroyed everything we had." "I know." He reached for the confession papers. "What happens after I sign?" "You step down from all remaining positions, pay restitution, give a full statement to the authorities." I slid him a pen. "And then you get help, Darren. Real help. And the company? We'll continue without you. We're already turning things around." He picked up the pen, then paused. "The old recipes, Mom's cinnamon rolls, the sourdough method. You're still using those?" "Of course. Some things shouldn't change." He signed the papers, his hand shaking slightly. Jennifer reached across and squeezed his arm. "I'll have someone drive you home," I said, gathering the documents. "Get some rest. Your lawyer will contact you about next steps." At the door, he called out, "Tatum." I turned back. "The bakery. You've made it better than it ever was. Even before." "I know." I met his eyes one last time. "Goodbye, Darren." Outside, Avery was waiting with the detective. He signed. I handed over the confession. "Everything you need is there." My phone buzzed, Dad texting, "Afternoon rush starting. Could use your help if you're done saving the world." "Go," Avery said, reading over my shoulder. "I'll handle the rest here." The drive back to Brooklyn felt longer than usual. By the time I walked into the bakery, the line was out the door. Dad was at the counter, flour on his apron, smile on his face. "Perfect timing," he said, tossing me an apron. "These good people need their bread." I tied on the apron, breathing in the familiar scents of yeast and butter. Through the window, I could see the afternoon sun painting the street gold. Customers chatted while they waited, the buzz of community filling the space. This was what winning really felt like, not destroying an enemy, but building something worth fighting for. Coming right up, I called to the waiting customers, rolling up my sleeves. There was work to be done, and I was ready to do it. "Ready?" Dad asked, adjusting his tie in the bakery's front window. "Almost." I placed the last fresh-baked loaf in the display case. The morning sun caught the golden crust, making it glow. Perfect. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Customers, reporters, and food critics, all waiting for our grand reopening ceremony. But this wasn't just about the bakery anymore. "They're here," Avery called from the door. Levi and Valeria walked in, followed by Jennifer. "No Darren?" I asked her quietly. She shook her head. "He's still at the treatment center, but he sent this." She handed me a card. Inside, his familiar handwriting, "Build it better than I ever could." Time to start," Levi said, checking his watch. "You ready to announce the foundation?" I nodded, straightening my jacket. We'd planned this carefully. The bakery's reopening would also launch the Fresh Start Foundation, providing training and support for small food businesses. Funded by the restitution money from Darren's case, it felt like the perfect way to close this chapter. Dad opened the doors, and the crowd flowed in. Cameras flashed as I stepped behind the counter. Not a podium, but the place where I felt most at home. "Welcome to Bradley's Bakery," I began. "Some of you might remember this place. Some of you might have read about its story. But today isn't about the past." I gestured to the walls, where photos hung showing the bakery's history, from my grandparents' opening day to my parents' wedding, to me as a child covered in flour. This place taught me something important. Success isn't just about profit margins or market share. It's about community, about creating something that matters. Valeria stepped forward, carrying a tray of fresh pastries. Which is why today, we're not just reopening a bakery, we're launching something new. I explained the foundation's mission, while Dad and Jennifer distributed bread samples. The reporters scribbled notes as I detailed our plans to help other small businesses avoid the pitfalls we'd faced. "The first grant," I announced, "will go to rebuilding Mario's Pizzeria in Queens, which nearly closed last month due to corporate pressure." Mario himself stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "This will save my family's business," he said. "Thank you." As the crowd mingled and celebrated, Levi pulled me aside. "The board approved the restructuring plan. Artemis Eateries will be officially renamed next week." "Good." I watched Dad teaching Mario's teenage son how to properly shape a pizza crust. Some traditions deserve to survive. Speaking of survival, Avery joined us. The prosecutor called. "Darren's making good progress. His therapist thinks he'll be ready for outpatient treatment soon." "And the company?" Levi asked. "Growing steadily," I said, "but sustainably this time. Quality over quantity." The bell above the door chimed and Clifford walked in. He looked uncertain until Jennifer waved him over. "I wasn't sure I should come," he said. "Of course you should." I handed him a warm cinnamon roll. "Mom's recipe. Your favorite, if I remember right." He took a bite, closing his eyes, just like she used to make. "Some things don't need improving," Dad said, joining us. "Just protecting." The morning passed in a blur of interviews, handshakes, and countless cups of coffee. Finally, as the crowd thinned, I found myself alone behind the counter, watching the last customers leave. "Quite a change from that Tuesday morning when everything fell apart," Avery said, perching on a stool. "Everything didn't fall apart," I corrected. "It just got rebuilt stronger." My phone buzzed. A text from Darren's treatment center. "Your brother-in-law asked us to share his progress report. 90 days sober, making amends." "Good news?" Avery asked, noting my smile. "Getting there." I put the phone away. "Hey, want to learn how to make sourdough? Dad's teaching a class tonight." "Me? Baking?" She laughed. "I burn microwave popcorn." "Everyone starts somewhere." I tossed her an apron. That's kind of the point of all this. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching the Fresh Start Foundation banner hanging above the door. Outside, life flowed past, people hurrying to meetings, couples walking hand in hand, kids racing home from school. Inside, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, warm and promising. Dad was showing Jennifer how to score the perfect crosshatch pattern on a loaf. Valeria and Levi argued playfully about the best way to knead dough. Even Clifford had rolled up his sleeves, flour dusting his expensive shirt. This was what winning really looked like. Not destroying an enemy or building an empire, but creating a space where broken things could be made whole again, where every day brought a fresh start, a new chance to rise. I picked up a bag of flour, ready to begin the evening's lessons. Okay, everyone. First rule of sourdough: patience. Good things take time. And time, I'd learned, had a way of making things right.
In the kitchen where morning sunlight streamed in, Erin Watson was carefully pouring coffee while organizing the day's schedule in her mind. She had an important presentation at the architectural firm, followed by her son Oliver's art exhibition, and then the monthly barbecue at her parents' house in the evening. She let out a deep sigh. "Mom's probably going to shower Lisa's child with praise again today," Erin muttered. Erin's husband Michael came down the stairs and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Good morning." "Lost in thought again?" "Sorry," Erin smiled. "It's not about work. I was thinking about tonight's barbecue." Michael Watson was successful as an IT consultant, but his gentle nature and depth of understanding were his greatest strengths. He placed his cup beside Erin's and poured himself some coffee. "Barbara and Frank," he showed his understanding. "You're worried for Oliver's sake, aren't you?" Erin Watson had achieved great success in her career as an architect. Her designs had shaped the new Chicago skyline, but her relationship with her parents was complicated. She pulled her long blonde hair back while taking a sip of coffee. "My parents always give Lisa's family special treatment. I didn't mind at first. I've walked my own path and am independent. But now I can see that Oliver is hurting." Before she could finish speaking, 10-year-old Oliver Watson came racing down the stairs. The boy with delicate features and intelligent eyes held his school backpack in one hand. In the other, he carried his latest artwork, an impressive watercolor landscape. "Mom, I'm taking this to the art show today," he said excitedly. Erin felt proud of her son's talent and took his painting. "It's wonderful, Oliver. I hope Grandma and Grandpa can see it today too." Oliver's expression clouded slightly. "Grandma didn't look at my paintings last time either. She was watching Amy's gymnastics video the whole time." Erin and Michael exchanged glances. Barbara Morrison, a 64-year-old former high school teacher, was known for her strict and controlling personality. Her husband Frank Morrison, a 66-year-old veteran, rarely contradicted his wife. "This time will be different," Erin tried to reassure her son, but she was also trying to convince herself. After breakfast, Erin sent Oliver off to school and headed to work. That afternoon, she successfully delivered her important presentation, receiving enthusiastic applause from the client. However, her mind was already on the family gathering that evening. After picking up Oliver from school, they headed to the art exhibition. Oliver's paintings received much praise, and the art teacher spoke enthusiastically about his talent. Erin felt proud of her son but couldn't help wishing that her parents would be equally proud of him. "Will I show Grandma and Grandpa my painting at tonight's barbecue?" Oliver asked. Erin gently stroked her son's hair. "Of course. But remember, Oliver, sometimes people only see what they want to see. That doesn't diminish your talent or your worth." Back at home, while preparing for the barbecue, Erin thought about past gatherings. The monthly family gatherings were always held at Barbara and Frank's house, with Lisa's family taking center stage. Lisa Clayton, Aaron's 32-year-old sister, was a stay-at-home mom, financially and emotionally dependent on their parents. Her husband Jason Clayton was a real estate agent who desperately tried to please his in-laws. And their 8-year-old daughter Amy was spoiled by her grandparents, getting everything she wanted. Erin had quietly endured this unfair treatment for years, but recently she had begun to notice that Oliver was being ignored by his grandparents. "I want to talk to you before the barbecue," Michael said in the evening as they were getting ready. His expression was serious. "What is it?" Erin paused from preparing the salad. "Your mother called me yesterday. She wanted my opinion on Amy's birthday present. They're planning a family trip to Disneyland." Erin stopped what she was doing. "What did they give Oliver for his birthday?" "A used basketball and a $10 bill, wasn't it?" Michael nodded. "I don't think we should let this continue. We need to do something to change your parents' behavior." Erin took a deep breath. "I never wanted to ruin my relationship with my parents. But I can't bear to see Oliver feeling unloved by his grandparents." In the car on the way to the barbecue that night, Erin turned to Oliver. "Stay calm tonight no matter how you're treated. Sometimes you can learn a lot just by quietly observing." Oliver looked puzzled but nodded. "Okay, Mom." Erin was surprised by her own determination. Tonight was not just about observing but standing up for her son. She took Michael's hand and nodded quietly. She knew he felt the same way. When Erin's car pulled up in front of her parents' house, she felt a slight tightness in her chest. The large white two-story house always evoked mixed emotions in her. It was a place where childhood memories mingled with adult frustrations. "Here we are, everyone," Erin called to Oliver in the back seat. Michael squeezed her hand and gave a small nod. "Ready?" "Yes, I'm ready," Erin said with a determined expression. Erin took a bowl of homemade quinoa salad from the passenger seat, and Michael carried a small box of desserts. Oliver carefully carried his art exhibition painting. The three of them walked along the gravel path toward the well-maintained garden. On this Sunday in May, beneath a clear blue sky, the lawn shone a vivid green. At the back of the garden stood a large oak tree, under which Lisa's family was already relaxing at the picnic table. Barbara Morrison had her granddaughter Amy on her knee and was stroking Amy's golden curls. "Here, Amy, I brought your favorite ribbon." Barbara was tying a bright pink ribbon in Amy's hair. "Oh, Erin, you're here," she said. Barbara's voice notably dropped in tone when she noticed her daughter's arrival. Frank Morrison stood proudly in front of the grill, wearing a white apron, preparing the meat. He was engaged in conversation with Jason Clayton and waved when he noticed Erin's family. "Hey, you finally made it," Frank called out. "I just started the fire." Erin smiled as she entered the garden. "Hello, Mom, Dad." She placed the salad bowl on the table. Barbara looked at it and pursed her lips. "Oh, salad again. Can't you make something more elaborate?" Erin took a deep breath and controlled her emotions. "Mom, this is a special quinoa and vegetable salad. I only used organic ingredients. It was a hit with my colleagues at work." Barbara waved her hand dismissively. "Yes, that's fine," she said, turning back to Amy immediately. "Now Amy, Grandma baked special cookies for you. Chocolate chip and peanut butter, your favorite." Amy clapped her hands happily. "Yay! Thank you, Grandma." Oliver stood quietly, still holding his painting. Erin placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "Mom, Oliver won an award at his school's art exhibition. He brought his work to show you." Barbara glanced briefly at Oliver but quickly looked away. Oh, that's nice. Amy also danced at the front of her kindergarten dance recital last week. She really has talent. Erin felt Oliver's shoulders droop slightly. She nodded to her son and whispered in his ear, "It's a wonderful painting." Jason stood with Frank at the grill, enthusiastically discussing how to cook the meat. Lisa sat at the picnic table, taking photos of Amy on her cell phone. "Michael, how about a beer?" Frank called out. Michael nodded. "Thanks, I'll have one." Erin guided Oliver toward the lawn. "Why don't you try playing with Amy?" Oliver looked anxious but gathered his courage and approached Amy. "Amy, do you want to play catch?" Amy frowned. "I don't want to play with Oliver," she shouted. "I'm going to eat cookies with Grandma." Barbara immediately embraced Amy protectively. "Erin, don't force her. Amy is having special time with Grandma right now." Erin bit her lip. "Oliver was just asking, Mom." Barbara sniffed. "Your son should be more sociable. Amy is the most popular child in her class." Michael came to Erin's side and quietly touched her arm. It was a signal to stay calm. Erin took a deep breath and headed toward the table. Frank had started grilling the meat. Pointing to a large piece of meat, he proudly said, "Lisa, Jason, Amy, I've saved prime rib for you. It's top quality. I got it from a special shop." Lisa said happily, "Thanks, Dad. Amy loves meat." Erin frowned. "Dad, what will Oliver get?" she asked. Frank hesitated a bit. "Oh, of course he'll get steak too," he said, but his eyes didn't meet Erin's. He quickly changed the subject and began asking about Jason's recent real estate deals. As time passed, the meal preparations were completed. Barbara spread an elaborately decorated tablecloth on the picnic table and arranged fancy paper plates and cutlery. Erin brought out the salad, and Michael put the dessert in the refrigerator. "Come on, everyone, gather around." Frank called out loudly. "The meat is ready." Everyone gathered at the table. Frank proudly brought the meat. In front of Amy was a perfectly cooked, tender-looking prime rib. Lisa and Jason also received juicy, beautifully pink meat. When Frank placed a plate in front of Oliver, Erin froze in shock. On Oliver's plate was a blackened, burnt piece of meat. The edges were charred, and even the center was brown and overcooked. "Dad, what is this?" Erin asked in disbelief. Barbara laughed lightly. "It's a bit overcooked, but that's fine, isn't it? He's a boy. A little toughness is good for him." Frank chuckled and jokingly said, "Even a dog might not eat it." Lisa and Jason also started laughing. "Oliver, you like the burnt parts, don't you?" "That's what boys like," Lisa said. Oliver was silent, staring at the burnt meat. Tears began to well up in his blue eyes. He was desperately trying to hold them back, but his small lips were trembling. Seeing this scene, Erin felt something break inside her. She slowly stood up and said in a calm voice, "This is unacceptable." The table suddenly fell silent. "What do you mean?" Barbara asked. "This meat," Erin pointed to her son's plate. "Oliver, you don't have to eat it." "But what a waste!" Barbara cried. "In our day, we ate with gratitude. Even if it's a bit burnt, it's still food." "Everyone else's meat is perfectly cooked," Erin pointed out calmly. "Why is Oliver the only one given meat like this?" Frank shrugged. "It just happened that way. I'll be more careful next time." Erin looked at Oliver. Tears were finally falling from his eyes. Seeing this, something inside Erin made a decision. She slowly stood up, took Oliver's plate, and threw it in a nearby trash can. Then she quietly declared, "Michael, Oliver, we're leaving." "Wait a minute, can't you take a joke?" Frank protested. "It's just a barbecue, don't make such a big deal out of it." Erin turned back and said in a quiet but powerful voice, "This isn't a joke, it's abuse of my son. You may not realize it, but you treat only Amy specially and always put Oliver second. You show no interest in his art, don't celebrate his successes, and today you gave him burnt meat and made fun of him. Today is the last day of that." Barbara's face flushed. "You always overreact. You're too sensitive." "This isn't an overreaction. If anything, my reaction is long overdue," Erin responded calmly. She took Oliver's hand, and Michael stood up and placed his hand on Oliver's shoulder. "For years, I've pretended not to see your unfair treatment. But it's over now." Lisa stood with her mouth open, at a loss for words. Jason looked uncomfortable, glancing at Frank and Barbara. Only Amy, not understanding the situation, continued happily eating her prime rib. Erin's family quietly left the garden and headed to the car. No one tried to stop them. In the car, Oliver asked in a small voice, "Mom, did I do something wrong? Were Grandpa and Grandma angry?" Erin sat next to her son and held him tightly. "Absolutely not. This is Grandma and Grandpa's problem. You did nothing wrong. You're a wonderful child." Michael, starting the car engine, looked at Erin and Oliver in the rearview mirror. "It's okay, champion. Sometimes even adults make mistakes. But don't worry, Mom will fix this." Erin gently wiped the tears from Oliver's cheek. "But don't worry, I'll fix this. I promise." As the car slowly pulled away, Erin looked at her parents' house through the window. A new determination was growing within her. Erin's family car drove quietly along the night road. Oliver had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted, and Michael, holding the steering wheel, occasionally glanced at his wife in the rearview mirror. Erin's expression was hard, her hands clenched on her knees. No one exchanged words, but the car was filled with heavy emotions. Upon returning home, Michael gently lifted Oliver and carried his sleeping son to his bedroom upstairs. Erin stood in the kitchen, mechanically making tea. Her mind was full of the events at the barbecue. When Michael came down the stairs and entered the kitchen, Erin was leaning on the counter, letting out a deep sigh. "How's Oliver?" she asked without turning around. Fast asleep, Michael placed his hand on her shoulder. "He was tired today." Erin finally turned and looked into Michael's eyes. Her eyes were moist with anger and sadness. "I made tea," she said, her voice small and trembling. They sat on the sofa in the living room, holding cups of warm chamomile tea. After a moment of silence, Erin finally spoke. "That crossed the final line," she said, trembling with anger. "For years, I've tolerated my parents' behavior. Their favoritism toward Lisa, their refusal to acknowledge my success. But today," she faltered. "I couldn't bear to see Oliver hurting," Michael said quietly. "When I saw tears in his eyes, I felt something break inside me too." Erin took a sip of tea and set down her cup. "I can't stand to see him feeling unloved by his grandparents anymore. This isn't just favoritism, it's outright abuse." Michael nodded. Today made it clear. This isn't just a generational gap or a lack of understanding. They're intentionally hurting Oliver. "We should take action," he continued. "But what should we do? Should we completely cut ties with your parents?" After a long silence, Erin looked up with a determined expression. I'll make them feel the same way. I have a plan. Michael noticed the change in his wife's expression. What kind of plan? First, we'll invite them to our house. A dinner party for reconciliation, Aaron began explaining. And then, we'll serve them a special meal. The same treatment Oliver received. That's not enough, she continued. Next, we'll plan a special vacation that includes the whole family. But we'll exclude only my parents. Michael raised his eyebrows. You're serious? Completely serious, Erin's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with determination. It's time to correct years of imbalance. They need to be taught a lesson. Late that night, they worked out the details of the plan. Michael understood Erin's anger and promised to support her. They shared Erin's feelings of having suffered from her parents' unfair treatment since childhood. The next morning, Erin got up early and immediately put her plan into action. After Oliver went to school and Michael headed to work, she began making phone calls. The first call was to her chef friend Carlos Sanchez at the upscale restaurant, Lucille. He was grateful to Erin for designing the new branch of his restaurant and felt indebted to her. Carlos, it's been a while. This is Erin Watson, she said on the phone. I'm planning a special dinner party. But I have an unusual request. She explained the situation to Carlos and talked about her plan. I need 2 completely different dinner courses. One using the finest ingredients for a perfect meal. The other. She continued, choosing her words carefully. I want it to look the same but be inferior in taste and quality. Especially the meat dish, I want it slightly burnt. Carlos was a bit perplexed, but after hearing Erin's story, he understood her plan and agreed to help. I got it, Erin. I'll create a special menu for you. Exactly as you wish. Next, Erin contacted Michael to confirm that he was also taking action. Michael had contacted a luxury travel agency to book a family trip to a private resort in the Caribbean. Caribbean Blue Resort was a top-tier facility with private beaches and individual villas. The reservation is confirmed, Michael reported over the phone. The first week of next month, 7 nights and 8 days. I secured a large villa that can accommodate the entire family except your parents. Erin nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. I'll contact all the relatives now. In the afternoon, Erin sent special electronic invitations to all relatives except her parents and Lisa's family, Erin's uncles and aunts, cousins, and Michael's family as well. The invitation for a special family reunion party in the Caribbean included photos of the luxurious resort and a note saying, "Please keep this a secret from Barbara and Frank as there is a surprise element." Responses began arriving immediately. Many relatives excitedly confirmed their participation. A message from Erin's Aunt Karen was also attached. I won't tell Barbara. We've been concerned about how she treats Oliver for a long time. By the time Michael returned from work and Oliver came back from school, Erin was still in her study making plans. Oliver came into the room and peeked over his mother's shoulder. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked curiously. Erin closed the screen and turned to her son with a smile. Just making some plans, she gently stroked his hair. Sometimes, Oliver, people need to accept the consequences of their actions. This is an adult matter, so don't worry about it. Oliver seemed to be trying to understand his mother's words. Is it about Grandma and Grandpa? Erin was surprised by her son's perceptiveness. Yes. But don't worry. Mom will make everything better, she gave him a reassuring smile. How's your homework? Need help? 2 weeks later, all preparations were complete. Erin took a deep breath and called her parents. Mom? When Barbara's voice came through the phone, Erin tried to keep her voice calm. "Hello, Mom," she said gently. "I have a suggestion for you. After the incident at the barbecue the other day, I'd like to host a special dinner party to repair our relationship. It will also be an opportunity to show you our new house." On the other end of the phone, Barbara seemed to hesitate. "Well, that's nice. But you were so angry." "Yes, I was angry," Erin admitted. "But thinking about Oliver, I believe family bonds are important. He needs a good relationship with his grandparents." Barbara was silent for a moment but finally agreed. "Of course, we should get along as family. I'll let Frank know." Erin proceeded with the conversation as planned. "Lisa's family has other plans, so they can't come. So let's make it a special night just for us." "It's a shame Lisa and Amy won't be there." Barbara's voice clearly showed her disappointment. Erin smiled and responded calmly, "But that will give you and Oliver more time to get to know each other better. He really wants to know you better." After hanging up, Erin reported to Michael. "They're coming. Next Friday, 7 p.m. Michael embraced his wife's shoulders. "Are you ready?" "No regrets." Erin shook her head. "No regrets. This isn't revenge, it's a lesson. To help them understand the weight of their actions." On the day of the dinner party, Erin and Michael's house was perfectly prepared. Beautiful flowers adorned the table in the dining room, and soft jazz music flowed through the room. Carlos and his assistant had entered through the back door and were making final preparations in the kitchen. Erin placed an expensive bottle of wine on the table and said to Michael, "Carlos has prepared the food according to my instructions. The main dishes look the same, but—" She smiled slightly. Michael took his wife's hand. "You're really going through with this?" "Of course," Erin said with determination. "Tonight they will learn a lesson. And tomorrow, the real sanctions begin." She gazed at her parents' seats at the dining table. They looked like the luxurious table settings for everyone else, but hidden there was the special hospitality that only they would receive. The doorbell rang, and Erin took a deep breath and headed for the door. At 7 o'clock on Friday evening, Erin was looking out the large living room window. She wore a dark blue dress, her hair beautifully styled up. The outdoor lights installed in the garden cast a soft light into the evening darkness. Michael came down the stairs and stood beside her. He was wearing a fine navy suit. "Nervous?" he asked gently. Erin shook her head slightly. "Not nervous. Just want to make sure this is the right thing to do." Michael placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "What you've decided is right. They need to understand what their actions lead to." Oliver was in the kitchen, curiously observing Carlos's assistants. He was wearing a neat shirt and pants, looking a bit more grown-up than usual. "Boss, everything is ready," Carlos emerged from the kitchen to report. Dressed in a white chef's coat, he exuded a professional air. "I've prepared the food as instructed." Erin smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, Carlos. I truly appreciate your help." The doorbell rang, and everyone in the room froze for a moment. Erin took a deep breath and headed for the entrance. Opening the door, she saw Barbara and Frank Morrison standing there. Barbara wore a beige dress with a pearl necklace. Frank was in a gray suit. Both looked a bit tense. "Good evening," Erin said in a calm voice. "Welcome." "Good evening, Erin," Barbara smiled slightly. "We brought this," she offered a bottle of wine. Erin accepted the bottle and invited them into the house. "Thank you. Please come through the living room to the dining area." Barbara and Frank stepped into the spacious living room and admired the high ceilings and the view from the large windows. Modern, elegant furniture was arranged throughout, and abstract artwork adorned the walls. "My, what a lovely home," Barbara exclaimed in surprise. "You two have really succeeded to afford such a fine house." Aaron smiled. "Yes, it's the result of hard work. My architectural business is doing well, and Michael's IT consulting is expanding." Frank looked at the view outside the window and nodded appreciatively. "Impressive view. Must be a great investment as real estate too." Michael approached to greet them. He politely extended his hand and said, "Welcome." Oliver also appeared from behind the adults and gave his grandparents a small wave. "Hello, Oliver," Barbara said somewhat awkwardly. "How are you?" Oliver glanced at his mother before quietly answering, "I'm fine, thank you." Erin clapped her hands lightly. "Now, shall we proceed to the dining room?" She led the group. The dining room had a beautifully decorated table, with silver cutlery and crystal glasses gleaming. An elegant chandelier hung from the ceiling, under which Michael and Oliver were already seated. The entire room was bathed in warm light, with soft classical music playing in the background. "Please, sit here," Erin guided Barbara and Frank to one end of the table. She herself sat next to Oliver, while Michael sat on the opposite side of the table. Erin poured the wine and proposed a toast. "To family bonds," she said quietly. Everyone clinked glasses and took a sip of their drinks in a slightly awkward atmosphere. "How are Lisa and Amy?" Erin started the conversation. Barbara's expression brightened. "Oh, they're doing very well. Amy has started ballet lessons. She seems to have talent," her teacher was praising her. Erin smiled. "That's wonderful," she placed her hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Oliver also won first prize in the school art contest last week." Barbara and Frank looked a bit surprised. "Oh, congratulations," Frank said, but there was no enthusiasm in his voice. At that moment, Carlos and his assistants brought out the appetizers. Beautiful appetizers, smoked salmon carpaccio with arugula salad, were placed in front of Michael, Erin, and Oliver. The colorful dishes looked like works of art. However, in front of Barbara and Frank were placed cold canned soups. They were brown liquids with a thin layer of oil floating on the surface. "What is this?" Barbara asked in confusion. She was comparing her plate with those around her. Erin responded as if nothing was wrong. "Oh, canned soup. I bought it on sale at the supermarket. It might be a bit old, but it's still edible." Frank frowned. "What are the others eating?" He pointed to Michael's plate. "We have special appetizers," Erin answered. "Carlos made them especially for us. But don't worry, the main course will be coming soon." Barbara had a puzzled expression but took her soup spoon and took a sip. She grimaced. "This has hardly any taste. And it's cold." Erin shrugged. "Is that so?" "I can't tell. But it's edible, isn't it?" Oliver quietly ate his appetizer while carefully observing his grandmother's reaction. Michael took a sip of wine and exchanged glances with Erin. After the unpleasant appetizer time passed, Carlos brought out the main course. Perfect steaks, specially prepared by Carlos, were placed in front of Michael, Erin, and Oliver. The juicy, tender-looking meat was served with a fragrant sauce and colorful vegetable sides. In contrast, blackened pieces of meat were placed in front of Barbara and Frank. The edges of the meat were charred, and the whole piece looked hard and shrunken. Barbara changed color and poked the meat with her fork. It was as hard as a stone. "This is inedible," she said angrily. "What is the meaning of this?" Erin replied calmly. "It's a bit overcooked, but that's fine, isn't it? Even a dog might not eat it, but..." She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. Frank stared at the meat and then suddenly looked into Aaron's eyes. His face began to redden. "This is intentional, isn't it?" His voice was low, suppressing anger. "Yes, Dad," Aaron answered calmly. "This is exactly the same treatment Oliver received from you 2 weeks ago. You served Oliver burnt meat and laughed about it. How does it feel? Embarrassing? Hurtful? Do you feel worthless?" Barbara sat with her mouth open, dumbfounded. "That was just a joke." "A joke?" Aaron's voice rose slightly. "Serving burnt meat to a 10-year-old child and making everyone laugh at him is a joke." Frank sank deep into his chair. "We didn't mean it that way. You've always treated Oliver as second best," Aaron continued. "You make special cookies for Amy, give her premium meat, and praise her talents. But for Oliver, you refuse to recognize his artistic talent, his gentle heart, anything." Barbara began to cry. "This is so cruel of you. Punishing us, making us feel this way." Aaron stood up and took an envelope from a side table, handing it to them. "These are tickets for a family trip starting tomorrow. Caribbean Blue Resort in the Caribbean. Oliver, myself, Michael, and all the other relatives will be going. We invited Lisa's family too, but we didn't invite you." Frank stared at the envelope and checked its contents. His expression changed as he began to understand. "You're excluding us from a family trip." "Yes," Aaron said firmly. "This is what you've been doing to Oliver for years. Excluding him from family gatherings, shutting him out of special moments, denying his value. Until you understand how you've been treating Oliver, you will be excluded from our lives. Parents should love their children equally. If not, you lose your privileges as grandparents." Barbara covered her face with trembling hands. "You're trying to shame us." "No," Aaron's voice softened slightly. "I want you to understand how Oliver has felt. How much he's been hurt every time he sees Amy getting special treatment. Tonight's dinner will be over in an hour. But Oliver's emotional wounds have lasted for years." Frank leaned his elbows on the table and held his head. The room was enveloped in heavy silence. Oliver said in a small voice, "I like to draw pictures. I wished Grandpa and Grandma would look at them." Those words brought fresh tears to Barbara's eyes. She stared at Oliver as if seeing him truly for the first time. "Oliver, she faltered. Aaron placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "This isn't a cruel act but a lesson. An opportunity for you to change. If you truly love Oliver, think about what you should do." Michael stood up and said, "Carlos, please serve a real dinner for everyone. Let's eat together as a family for a new beginning." Carlos brought new dishes from the kitchen. This time, the same beautiful food was served to everyone. However, the atmosphere of the evening had changed. Barbara and Frank ate silently, occasionally staring at Oliver. In their eyes floated new emotions, shame and regret. Aaron took a sip of wine and gazed at the night sky outside the window. In her heart, justice was being realized. Tomorrow, they would head to the Caribbean, leaving only her parents behind. And during that time, they would have time to think. She smiled as she watched Oliver happily eating his meal. A photo of Aaron, Michael, Oliver, and relatives smiling against the backdrop of the Caribbean's turquoise blue sea and white sand beaches. Aaron posted the photo on social media with the caption, "Best Family Vacation #LovingFamily #Caribbean Memories." A month had passed since the trip, but warm memories came flooding back each time she looked at the photo. Erin put down her smartphone and stood by the window, gazing at the garden. The Caribbean trip had been a wonderful experience. Oliver had built sand castles with his cousins, enjoyed snorkeling, and every day had been an adventure. Aaron's aunts and uncles also seemed to relax more freely without Barbara and Frank present. "Mom, look!" Oliver burst into the living room, showing his new painting. It was a vibrant watercolor of tropical fish they had seen during the trip. "I'm entering it in the school exhibition." Aaron took her son's work and smiled. "It's wonderful, Oliver. You really have talent." Michael appeared from the kitchen and placed his hand on Oliver's shoulder. "This is a masterpiece. We should frame it and display it." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? Aaron frowned. She wasn't expecting visitors. Michael headed to the door and looked through the peephole. His expression changed. "It's Barbara and Frank," he said quietly. Aaron tensed up. Since the Caribbean trip, Barbara had called several times, but Aaron had ignored all the calls. She felt she wasn't ready to talk to her parents yet. Her anger had not cooled. "Should I open it?" Michael asked. Aaron took a deep breath and said, "Open it." Turning to Oliver, she said, "Would you play in your room for a while? We need to have an adult conversation." Oliver hesitated a bit but nodded and went upstairs. Michael opened the door. Barbara and Frank Morrison stood at the entrance. Both looked tired, appearing older than usual. Frank held a brown envelope in his hand. Barbara's eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "May we come in?" Frank asked quietly. Aaron hesitated but nodded slightly. "Please do." The two entered the living room. Barbara didn't try to sit on the sofa but stood in the center of the room, staring at Aaron. "What do you want?" Aaron asked coldly. Her voice still contained anger. Barbara was tearful. "We understand what you were saying, Aaron," her voice trembled. "We were wrong. Terribly wrong." Frank stood beside his wife and placed his hand on her shoulder. "We've had time to think about many things," he said. "What you did to us was justified. We deserved it." Aaron crossed her arms and said, "Yes, you did deserve it." Frank opened the envelope and took out a letter. His hand was shaking slightly. "This is our apology and promise," he said as he began to read. "Dear Aaron, Michael, and especially Oliver. We acknowledge that for years, we have unconsciously treated you unfairly. We have favored Lisa's family and hurt Oliver. We are ashamed." Frank paused for a moment and cleared his throat. "We only gave special attention to Amy and didn't try to see Oliver's talents and uniqueness. For the first time, through the experience you gave us, we understood how hurtful our actions were. When we heard about the family vacation that didn't include Lisa, Jason, and Amy, we felt the pain of exclusion for the first time." Barbara spoke up. "I saw your photos on social media every day. Everyone looking so happy. And I thought, so this is what Oliver has been feeling." Frank continued. "We promise to change from now on. If you'll forgive us, please give us the opportunity to repair our relationship with Oliver and become true grandparents. We've also started family therapy. Please give us another chance to start over." After he finished reading the letter, the room was enveloped in silence. Aaron's stern expression softened slightly. "We want to apologize to Oliver too," Barbara said softly. "In person." Aaron thought for a moment and exchanged glances with Michael. Michael gave a small nod. "Oliver." Aaron called toward the stairs. "Could you come down for a moment?" Oliver carefully came down the stairs. He looked a bit nervous when he saw his grandparents. Barbara slowly knelt down to Oliver's eye level. There were traces of tears on her face. Oliver, Grandma and Grandpa did something very bad. We didn't treat you specially, and we didn't recognize your wonderful talents. She took his hands. You are a wonderful child, and we love you. Can you forgive us? Oliver thought for a moment and asked with a serious expression, will you give me steak instead of burnt meat too? The tension in the room dissolved instantly. Frank couldn't help but laugh, and while holding back tears, he said, I promise, champion. I'll cook you the most delicious steak in the world. In fact, I'll teach you how to cook if you want. And will you show me more of your paintings? Barbara added. I want to display them in Grandma's living room. Oliver, looking a bit embarrassed, slowly nodded. Okay. Erin felt a warmth in her chest. She looked at Barbara and Frank and smiled. Rebuilding our relationship will take time. But let's move forward step by step. Several months later, the Morrison family had changed significantly. Barbara and Frank attended weekly family therapy sessions and began to understand their behavior patterns and how they had been formed. Barbara, in particular, made an earnest effort to change. She began to recognize that her controlling personality had been influenced by her own mother. Lisa was initially angry about Erin's actions. How could you humiliate our parents like that? She protested. However, witnessing the change in her parents, she also began to reconsider her dependent relationship with them. I've been spoiling Amy too much, Lisa confessed to Erin one day. You were right. When autumn came, the entire Morrison family gathered at Frank and Barbara's house. Without the previous tension, the table was filled with laughter. Barbara baked special cookies equally for Oliver and Amy, and proudly displayed both children's recent works, Oliver's paintings and photos from Amy's dance recital. Frank had taken up woodworking as a hobby after retirement and was teaching Oliver the basics. They built a small birdhouse together and placed it in the garden. A new bond was forming between grandfather and grandson. Every Sunday, Barbara baked special cookies for Oliver and praised his artistic talent. You'll be a famous artist someday, she would say, and display his latest work on the refrigerator. Seeing the change in her family, Erin was convinced that her actions had been right. Sometimes tough love is necessary. She stood by the window, quietly smiling as she watched Frank and Oliver playing in the garden. The wounds had healed, and family bonds were stronger than before. In the quiet suburb of Richmond Hills outside Philadelphia, with its beautiful tree-lined streets, Amy Watson's story begins. Amy was a dedicated nurse at Pennsylvania Hospital. Her kindness and compassion were highly valued by her patients, and she greeted them with a smile every day, easing their anxieties. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. How are you feeling today? Amy asked in a gentle voice. Amy, I'm so glad to see you. Hospital life isn't so bad when you're around, the elderly patient smiled back. Amy had been married for 3 years to Richard Watson, who taught history at the local high school. Richard was a reserved, intellectual man who drove an old car and seemed to live a modest life. One evening during dinner, Richard gently embraced Amy from behind. How was your day? Busy but fulfilling. How about yours? How's the preparation for your new history class coming along? Amy kissed her husband on the cheek. Good. I'm thinking about a new approach to teaching the Civil War. I want the students to read actual letters from that time so they can understand people's experiences. There was deep affection between them, but their life held a secret. Richard came from a wealthy family, but he had hidden this fact. He had chosen to live by his own means rather than rely on his family's fortune, and he hadn't revealed this even to Amy. Meanwhile, Amy's mother Martha was a cold, controlling woman who worked at a local real estate company. Having won a beauty pageant in her youth, Martha was strongly fixated on appearances and social status. "Victoria, that new necklace is lovely. Did Jason buy it for you?" Martha's eyes narrowed at her daughter's jewelry. "Yes, it's to celebrate his latest courtroom victory." "He's so generous," Amy's sister Victoria answered proudly. She managed an upscale boutique and had married Jason, a local attorney, 2 years ago. They had recently had a daughter, Lily, who had just turned 1. "You've made such a good marriage." "Just as I expected," Martha said with satisfaction. Victoria was obsessed with portraying a perfect family image on social media, and her posts always gathered hundreds of likes. "Perfect. This filter will really make Lily's eye color pop. This will be a hit on Instagram for sure," she murmured, staring intently at her screen. Amy was constantly criticized by her mother and sister, and often overlooked at family gatherings. One day, when visiting Martha's house, she received a cold welcome. "Oh, Amy. You're still wearing that dress. Didn't you wear the same one last Christmas?" Martha snickered. "I like it, Mom," Amy answered in a small voice. "Amy, is Richard still teaching at that little school? No talk of promotion?" Victoria asked condescendingly. "He loves teaching. He values fulfillment, not money." "Oh, I see. That's why you're still living in that tiny house." Victoria's words carried obvious contempt. Amy and Richard had been trying to have a child for 2 years. After experiencing several miscarriages, Amy finally had a stable pregnancy, and the doctor told her she was expecting twins. That night in their bedroom, Amy told Richard with tears in her eyes, "Richard, finally, our baby, no, our babies." "Oh, Amy." Richard embraced his wife. "You've been so strong. We'll get through this together." "But I have to tell Mom and Victoria. I'm afraid of their reaction," Amy said anxiously. "No matter what your mother and sister say, our children will be loved," Richard promised. That weekend, they were tense in the car on the way to Martha's house. "Ready?" Richard asked gently. "Yes, but honestly, I'm nervous. Mom has always criticized my life choices. This time too." "It's okay. We have happy news. If they're not happy for us, it doesn't matter. This is our family, our joy." That weekend, a party was being held at Martha's house to celebrate Lily's first birthday. Pink and gold balloons decorated the exterior of the colonial-style house. Dozens of cars filled the parking area, and a festive atmosphere was already in the air. About 20 relatives and friends had gathered in the living room, engaged in lively conversation. The table was loaded with typical American family dishes: roast beef, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and Martha's famous apple pie. When Amy and Richard arrived, Victoria greeted them with a perfunctory smile. "Finally, you're here. Everyone has already started eating." Amy handed Lily a small gift. "Happy birthday, Lily. I picked this out especially for you." The small box wrapped with a pink ribbon contained a wooden toy. Lily laughed innocently and reached for the present. Victoria intercepted it, saying, "Oh, that's cute. But Lily needs something more sophisticated," and promptly set the box aside. Amy took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen. Martha was boiling water in a large pot for pasta. "Mom, can I help?" Amy offered. "It's fine. You don't need to do anything." As usual, Martha replied coldly, hurting Amy. Amy silently returned to the dining room. At the table, Victoria and Jason dominated the conversation. "Jason won a big case last week," Victoria boasted. "So we decided to buy a new BMW. And we're planning a trip to Italy this summer. We're going to take Mom with us." "Oh, how wonderful," one of the relatives exclaimed. "You two are really successful." Amy ate quietly, and Richard gently held her hand. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Amy smiled and nodded, but her eyes looked sad. When dessert time came, the lights were dimmed. Martha carried in an elaborate cake with lit candles. Everyone sang, "Happy Birthday," and Lily sat in her high chair, delightedly watching the flame on the cake. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a special moment." Martha stood up and raised her glass. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my precious granddaughter Lily's special day. Victoria and Jason are wonderful parents, and Lily is the best grandchild I could hope for. She is the future of our family, our pride." As everyone applauded, Amy and Richard exchanged glances. Amy took a deep breath and nodded to Richard. "It's time," she whispered. "Actually, we have an announcement to make." Amy nervously stood up. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to her. "Richard and we're expecting twins. Early next year, Lily will have 2 cousins." A momentary silence dominated the room. Then, Amy could see disgust creeping onto Victoria's face and Martha's eyes widening with anger. "Oh, is that so?" Martha said without changing her tone. "Your sister's child is barely 1 year old, and you're trying to spoil that." "Mom, what are you saying?" Amy asked in confusion. She could feel her heart racing as she sensed the tension in the room. "It's obvious." Martha's voice rose. "Victoria and Jason's child should be the center of the family, but you're trying to steal the spotlight. You've always been like that. Always inadequate, always jealous, always trying to prove something." Tension filled the room. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes. Amy felt her face growing hot. "Martha, please stop," Richard said in a quiet but firm voice. He stood up and placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. "This isn't about taking away from Lily's day. We just wanted to share our good news with the family." "Family?" Martha scoffed. "What would a bottom-feeder teacher like you know? Victoria's husband is a successful lawyer, and Lily has a bright future. What will your children become? People who struggle with money their whole lives, like you?" "Enough." Richard raised his voice. The anger that had been hidden beneath his calm exterior was surfacing. Martha headed to the kitchen and picked up the large pot of boiling pasta water. There was a gleam of anger and contempt in her eyes. She slowly walked toward Amy. It took the people in the room a few seconds to understand what was happening. "Your sister's child is enough. Nobody wants your children. Don't bring more trash into this world." Martha screamed. Her face was contorted with rage. Amy was frozen with fear. The guests around them stood still, as if frozen. Just as Richard stepped forward to protect his wife, Martha tilted the pot forward. "We don't need you." The boiling water splashed onto Amy's abdomen. Amy's scream echoed throughout the house. She collapsed in panic and pain, screaming as she felt her skin burning through her clothes. She instinctively curled up to protect her abdomen, but the hot water had already flowed down to her thighs. "Amy!" Richard rushed to his wife. He took off his jacket and tried to place it on her wounds. "Someone call an ambulance. Now!" His voice cracked with fear and anger. While the people in the room panicked, Victoria put her arm around Martha's shoulders, a satisfied smile on her face. "You finally got what you deserved," she said quietly. Amy began to lose consciousness from the intense pain. Through her blurring vision, the last thing she saw was her husband's terrified face and the cold, satisfied expressions of Victoria and Martha. "Richard, the babies," Amy said in a faint voice. Her consciousness was gradually fading. In the distance, the sound of approaching ambulance sirens could be heard. Richard gently cradled Amy, sending a cold look toward Martha and Victoria. In his eyes was a determination they had never seen before. A doctor's voice echoed in the hospital corridor giving instructions. Paramedics carried Amy in on a stretcher. Richard held her hand tightly, desperately following them. "Sir, please wait here," a nurse said in a kind but firm tone. "We need to begin treatment immediately. We'll update you on her condition as soon as possible." Richard collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, holding his head in his hands. His hands were shaking, and his face showed a mixture of fear and anger. He took out his smartphone and dialed a number. "Uncle Robert. I need your help urgently," he spoke in a low voice. "Yes, my wife, it's an emergency. Can you come to Philadelphia from Boston right away?" Hours later, Amy woke up in the intensive care unit at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. Her abdomen and thighs were covered in bandages, and an N4 was connected to her arm. The room was dimly lit, and it was already night outside. She could see Richard sleeping in a chair. "Richard!" Amy called out in a hoarse voice. Richard jumped up and took her hand. "Amy! I'm so glad you're awake. I'll call the doctor." "Wait, the babies?" Amy asked in a trembling voice. Richard smiled reassuringly. "They're fine. Both of them. The doctor said that thanks to your clothes absorbing most of the heat, there was minimal direct damage to the babies." Amy sighed with relief, and tears streamed down her face. "Thank goodness, thank goodness." The doctor entered the room and checked Amy's condition. "Mrs. Watson, I'm glad you've regained consciousness. Our tests show that your babies are safe. However, you have suffered second-degree burns. Recovery will take time." "Thank you, doctor," Amy answered weakly. "The police are here. When you're ready to talk about your condition, they would like to hear your testimony." Amy nodded sadly. She was trying to accept the reality that she would have to press charges against her mother and sister. The next morning, 2 detectives visited Amy's hospital room. "Mrs. Watson, you've been through a terrible experience. Could you tell us about yesterday's events, as much as you're able?" the female detective asked gently. Amy explained the day's events to the police in detail: the pregnancy announcement, Martha's anger, and the horrific assault. The 2 detectives took detailed notes. "Martha Johnson and Victoria Clark have already been arrested. They are being held on suspicion of aggravated assault and harm to a fetus," the male detective explained. Several party attendees recorded the incident. "The evidence is clear." After the detectives left, Richard returned to Amy's hospital room with a strange expression, a mixture of determination and sadness. He sat down and took a deep breath. "Amy, there's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. I haven't been honest about my family. The door opened, and an elderly man in an expensive suit entered. Richard, it's time. Amy, this is my uncle, Robert Morrison, Richard introduced. He's one of the most famous lawyers in Boston and also our family's legal counsel. The Watson family's legal counsel, to be precise, Robert corrected, nodding to Amy. It's an honor to meet you, Amy. Richard has told me a lot about you. Amy looked at them both with a confused expression. The Watson family. Legal counsel. Richard, what's going on? Richard looked at his wife apologetically. My family is wealthy. Quite wealthy. We're the founding family of Watson Pharmaceuticals. Amy's eyes widened in surprise. Watson Pharmaceuticals. But why didn't you tell me? I wanted people to see me for who I am, not for my family's wealth, Richard explained. And I wanted to live by my own means. I wanted to be a teacher and live a normal life. But now. His voice hardened. Now it's time to use that wealth and power to protect you and our children. Robert Morrison opened his briefcase containing documents. In addition to the criminal charges against Martha Johnson and Victoria Clark, we will also file a civil lawsuit. We will seize all their assets and take legal measures to ensure they cannot harm you or your children in the future. Is this revenge? Amy asked quietly. This is justice, Robert stated firmly. And it's also protection to ensure they don't harm you or your children in the future. That afternoon, Richard's parents, Linda and Jonathan Watson, rushed from Boston. Despite their elegant and conservative appearance, Linda and the dignified Jonathan were surprisingly warm toward Amy. You've made our son happy, Linda said, holding Amy's hand. That alone makes you family. And now, you're giving us 2 grandchildren. Whatever your mother may be like, we will be your real family. Outside the hospital, the headline "Mother and Sister Throw Boiling Water on Pregnant Woman" was being reported in local news. Martha and Victoria's names and photos appeared on television and in newspapers, with widespread criticism and anger directed at their actions. Lying in bed, Amy gazed at the sunset outside her window. Her life had completely changed in just a few days. She had experienced terrible violence, learned the true nature of her mother and sister, and discovered her husband's secret heritage. She placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the 2 lives growing there. I'll protect you, she whispered quietly. And we will be strong. We'll get through this and become a better family. Richard returned to the room and sat beside her. I can take you home tomorrow, he said gently. After that, we'll make a new beginning. Amy smiled and held her husband's hand. Even in her pain, she felt hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was no longer alone. 2 months passed, and her burns gradually healed. The doctors repeatedly performed ultrasounds, confirming that the twin babies were developing normally. They're both doing well, Dr. Johnson, the obstetrician, smiled and pointed at the monitor. A boy and a girl. Wonderfully, there's absolutely no impact from that incident. I'm so relieved, Amy cried. Richard also had tears in his eyes as he squeezed his wife's hand. Your body is also recovering well, the doctor continued. The burn scars will remain for a while, but they'll fade over time. Amy placed her hand on her belly, feeling the pulse of life within. Their safety is my greatest healing. Martha and Victoria's trial was proceeding rapidly. Robert Morrison's legal strategy was relentless, and he had doctors, nurses, and witnesses to the incident give detailed testimony. In court, a decisive video recorded by one of the relatives attending the party was submitted as evidence. It clearly showed Martha pouring boiling water on Amy and Victoria, saying, "You finally got what you deserved." The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps. This act was not merely an outburst of anger, but a planned assault, the prosecution argued to the jury. The defendants used this opportunity to attempt to cause permanent harm to the victim and her unborn children. Amy's best friend Sarah also took the stand. Amy had been emotionally abused by her mother for years, Sarah testified in a trembling voice. Martha constantly criticized Amy and dismissed her successes. Meanwhile, her sister Victoria was praised for everything she did. Most shocking was the testimony of Victoria's husband, Jason. He seemed consumed by guilt. "My wife, after hearing about Amy's pregnancy," she said, "we need to find a way to end Amy's pregnancy. Our child should remain the only grandchild," he testified in a shaking voice. The day before the party, she was planning something with her mother on the phone. "I heard the words, 'how to stop her.' I thought it was a joke at the time, but..." His voice trailed off. Martha and Victoria's lawyers argued that the defendants' actions were the result of temporary emotional disturbance, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. While the trial proceeded, Amy and Richard purchased a new house with the Watson family's support. It was a beautiful two-story home with a spacious yard, and preparations for the twins' nursery were underway. "This house will be a new beginning for us and our children," Amy looked around the spacious living room. "It will be a place where they grow up safe and loved." At the courthouse, Judgment Day finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters. "Defendant Martha Johnson, you have been found guilty of aggravated assault and harm to a fetus," the judge said with a stern expression. "This court sentences you to 8 years in prison. Defendant Victoria Clark, you are sentenced to 5 years in prison as an accomplice." Additionally, they were ordered to pay a combined $5 million in damages. Amy quietly cried. This was a victory, but there was also sadness in her heart. The family was permanently divided, and her children would grow up never knowing their maternal grandmother or aunt. "All I ever wanted was just for them to love me," Amy quietly told Richard. A week after the sentencing, while Amy was having a regular checkup at the hospital, an unexpected visitor appeared. It was Victoria's husband Jason, carrying his 1-year-old daughter Lily. "May I talk to you?" he asked nervously. Amy nodded and invited Jason and Lily into the waiting room. "I'm proceeding with divorce from my wife," Jason explained. "But I want Lily to know her cousins. She's an innocent child. And I don't want her to grow up with hatred." Amy looked at little Lily. She had Victoria's eyes and smile, but there was no malice in her innocence. "Of course," Amy answered kindly. "Lily is always welcome. When our children are born, I'm sure they'll get along well." In this moment, Amy understood what true victory was. It wasn't revenge, but breaking the chain of hatred for the next generation. "I may not be able to forgive, but I'll move forward for the children," Amy resolved. "Lily is part of our family. She doesn't need to bear her mother's mistakes." Richard agreed and invited Jason and Lily for weekend dinners. New family bonds were beginning to heal old wounds. 5 years passed. In the garden of the Richmond Hills mansion on a beautiful summer day, children's laughter echoed. Amy and Richard's twins, Matthew and Sophia, were now 4.5 years old, playing energetically with Lily. "Matthew, throw the ball," called 6-year-old Lily. With her blonde hair tied in a ponytail, she had inherited her mother's beauty, but her character was gentle and thoughtful. "Here you go, Lily," Matthew answered cheerfully, throwing the ball. Amy watched them from the terrace while enjoying a warm cup of coffee. Faint burn scars still remained on her abdomen and thighs, but she was no longer ashamed of them. For her, they were proof of the trials she had overcome. "I'm glad the children get along so well," Jason said as he sat on the terrace. He had remarried, and a 6-month-old baby had been born to him and his new wife, Carol. "Lily looks forward to coming here every weekend." "We also look forward to having her," Amy smiled. "She's really a wonderful child." Richard came out onto the terrace with a pitcher of cold lemonade. "Jason, how are the recent consultations going?" he asked. Jason had started working as a legal advisor for the Watson Foundation, introduced by Richard. "They're going well. Last week's charity event was a huge success," Jason answered. "Amy's scholarship program is gaining a lot of support." Amy smiled as she gazed at the garden. She had used her tragic experience to establish a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence. Named Angel Wings, this foundation had helped hundreds of women and children over the past few years. "I'm planning to go to Manford Women's Prison next week," Amy suddenly said. Jason and Richard looked at her with surprised faces. "To see Martha?" Richard asked quietly. Amy nodded. "It's been 5 years. I have nothing to say to her, but she might have something to say to me." She took a deep breath. "And I feel like it's time to end something." The following week, Amy sat in the state prison's visitor waiting room. Her heart was pounding, but her expression was calm. The door opened, and Martha appeared in an orange prison uniform. 5 years of prison life had changed her. Her once confident demeanor was gone, and she looked old and tired. When she saw Amy, she stopped for a moment and opened her eyes wide. "Amy," Martha said in a trembling voice. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either," Amy answered quietly. Martha sat at the table and folded her hands. Her eyes were red, and her wrinkled face showed deep regret. "The children, are they well?" Martha asked timidly. "Yes, Matthew and Sophia are doing fine. They're growing into very bright and caring children," Amy answered calmly. "They get along well with Lily too." Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. I'm sorry," she said in a hoarse voice. "For what I did. I don't expect to be forgiven. But I wanted to apologize." Amy stared at her silently. She no longer felt hatred, but she wasn't ready to speak of forgiveness either. "I saw your picture in the newspaper," Martha continued. "The foundation you established. You're helping a lot of people." "I want to make sure others don't go through what I did," Amy said. "I want to break the cycle of violence and hatred." Martha covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. "I was a terrible mother. I had a bad influence on Victoria too. She's still. She chose not to change," Amy said quietly. She had heard that Victoria had not improved her attitude in prison and remained isolated. "But that's not your responsibility. We all make our own choices." As visiting time drew to a close, Amy stood up. "I won't teach my children to hate you," she said. "They know that their grandmother made mistakes, but that's because she's human. No more, no less." Martha nodded as she wiped away her tears. "Thank you, that's more than enough." As Amy left the prison, Richard was waiting and embraced her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. "Yes," Amy smiled. "I feel like I can finally let go of the past." That night, Amy was reading a bedtime story to the children in their bedroom. Matthew and Sophia were cuddled on her lap, and Lily sat in a chair, listening intently. And the brave girl decided not to defeat the scary dragon, but to talk to him instead, Amy read in a soft voice. She realized that the dragon was just lonely. And they became friends. Sophia asked curiously. "Yes, gradually," Amy answered. "Sometimes, it takes time to repair relationships. But what's important is to keep love and understanding." After putting the children to bed, Amy sat with Richard on the terrace, looking up at the starry sky. "I'm truly happy to have you and the children," she said quietly. "It's because you've been so strong that we have this family." Richard took her hand. Beyond the pain of the past, Amy had found true healing. It wasn't a perfect family or a perfect life, but genuine bonds centered on love and compassion. Laura Collins took a sip of coffee as she gazed out the window. From her apartment, she could see Chicago awakening, bustling with morning activity. The city's energy filled her with excitement. "Mom, I can't find my socks." Emma's voice called from the living room. Laura turned around with a smile. "In the bottom drawer of your closet, the pink ones are there." 6-year-old Emma was her everything. 3 years ago, after divorcing her husband James, they had started their life together in this small, modern, and cozy apartment. With interior design as her hobby, Laura had maximized the limited space to create a home for herself and Emma. Colorful paintings adorned the white walls, soft ambient lighting filled the rooms, and photographs of the two of them were displayed throughout. "Found them." Emma came running with a beaming smile, holding up her socks. "That's great. Let's have breakfast. Today's an important day." Laura worked as a marketing director at a prestigious advertising agency. Today she had an important presentation with a client and had been busy preparing. Balancing work and motherhood wasn't easy. She often stayed up late working on materials and woke up early to help Emma get ready. Yet she never showed her fatigue in front of her daughter, always maintaining a smile. "Mom, after school today, I'm going to paint the ocean," Emma said. Laura gently stroked Emma's blonde hair and smiled. "That's wonderful. You do love the ocean, don't you?" Emma Collins was a first grader at a public elementary school. Curious by nature, she particularly enjoyed reading books about animals and the ocean. After the divorce, James still visited once a month, and Emma looked forward to spending time with her father. Fortunately, the two parents maintained a friendly relationship, cooperating for Emma's sake. "Hey Mom, when are Grandpa and Grandma coming to visit?" Laura's smile froze for a moment at that question. "Well, Grandpa and Grandma live far away, so they can't visit very often. Maybe we'll see them at Christmas." In reality, her parents, Helen and Frank Watson, lived in a small town in Michigan, just a 2-hour drive away. Laura's relationship with her parents was complicated. Helen, a former high school teacher, appeared reserved and gentle on the surface, but in fact, she always agreed with her husband's opinions, masking her coldness like a facade. Frank had worked at a local bank for 35 years and was a man with strict, conservative values. In his eyes, Laura's independent life and career in Chicago had always been a source of displeasure. "Emma, get your bag. It's time to go." As Laura watched Emma dash out of the room, she sighed. Emma didn't yet understand the strained relationship with her grandparents. They only met a few times a year on special occasions, and even those times were tense for Laura. Laura had a sister named Christy. Unmarried and living near their parents, Christy worked at a local insurance company. She had grown up as her parents' favorite and always envied Laura's success in Chicago. Even in phone conversations, Christy's voice carried subtle sarcasm. "Mom and Dad talk about you a lot. Why don't you come back home?" she would say, though her voice never conveyed any genuine welcome. Laura kept visits to her childhood home to a minimum. Since childhood, she had been treated as the daughter who never met expectations, especially subjected to harsh criticism from her father. Moving to Chicago for college had been her way of maintaining mental self-defense by keeping distance from her family. When she got married, her parents didn't bless the union, calling it out of her league, and when she divorced, they coldly remarked, as expected. And now, they showed little interest even in their granddaughter Emma, sometimes forgetting to send birthday presents. "Mom, I'm ready." Emma's cheerful voice interrupted her thoughts. Laura regained her smile and took her daughter's hand. "Let's go, princess." Emma continued to wish for a closer relationship with her grandparents. "I want to try Grandma's cookies," or "I heard Grandpa is good at fishing," she would occasionally say. At such times, Laura tried to answer as cheerfully as possible, despite her complex emotions. Having overcome childhood trauma, Laura was determined to give Emma the love she herself had never received. Squeezing Emma's hand, she silently vowed, "I will never hurt you." On Friday, Laura was spreading documents in the glass-walled conference room at her office. Despite the air conditioning, beads of sweat formed on her forehead from the tension. "For tomorrow's presentation to Twilight Cosmetics, have these figures been verified?" her boss Martin asked, pointing to a section. Laura flipped through the materials while confirming the spot he indicated. The important client meeting tomorrow required weekend work. Normally she would decline, but this client was crucial for the company and could significantly impact her career. "Yes, I confirmed with the marketing department yesterday." "There's no problem." Her phone rang, and Laura frowned. It might be Emma's school. "Excuse me, let me check this." Answering the phone, she heard the voice of Gina, their regular babysitter. "Laura, I'm so sorry, but I've had a fever since this morning. I don't think I can watch Emma tomorrow." Laura's heart sank. "Are you okay, Gina? Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, while her mind raced thinking about tomorrow's schedule. Finding a babysitter on a Saturday at such short notice would be extremely difficult. "Don't worry. I think it's just a summer cold. You have it worse than me." "I'm sorry." After hanging up, Laura held her head in her hands. She tried contacting friends, but everyone's weekend plans were already full. Emma's father, James, was away on a business trip and unreachable. The phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number. "Laura?" "It's Christy." Laura was momentarily speechless at her sister's voice. Calls from Christy were rare. Could something be wrong? "Christy, what's going on? Is everything okay?" "Seems I called at just the right time." Christy's voice was strangely cheerful. "Mom and Dad are going to St. Joseph Beach on Lake Michigan tomorrow. They said they'd like to take Emma along." "Really?" Laura couldn't hide her surprise. It was unusual for her parents to express concern for Emma. "But I have important work tomorrow, so I can't go." "That's fine. I'm going too, and we'll all look after Emma." Christy's voice had an unusual warmth to it. "Besides, Mom and Dad have been saying lately that they want to get closer to Emma. How about this opportunity?" A conflict arose in Laura's heart. While she felt cautious about the sudden offer, she also hoped that Emma might have a good time with her grandparents. Above all, It would solve tomorrow's babysitting problem. I do have an important meeting tomorrow, Laura said, carefully choosing her words. If you can take care of Emma, that would be a big help. Then it's settled. I'll pick her up at 9 tomorrow morning. After hanging up, Laura returned to her desk and pondered. This was the first time her parents and Christy had expressed a desire to spend time with Emma. It might be a good opportunity for Emma, a rare chance to build a relationship with her grandparents. That night, Laura told Emma about the next day's plans. Emma, tomorrow you're going to the beach with Grandpa, Grandma, and Aunt Christy. Emma's eyes lit up. Really? I get to go to the beach. Yay! Seeing Emma's joy, Laura suppressed her own anxiety. That's right. Mommy has to work, so I can't go with you, but I'll be back by evening. I'm going to build a sand castle. Emma jumped up and down. And collect seashells. I'll bring them back as a present for you. Laura hugged Emma tightly. Have fun. But be sure to listen to Grandpa and Grandma, okay? After putting Emma to bed, Laura began preparing for the next day. She packed a beach bag with towels, a change of clothes, swimwear, sandals, sunscreen, a hat, a water bottle, and snacks. She also wrote down detailed instructions on a note. She didn't forget to mention Emma's shellfish allergy. The next morning, Laura woke up early to help Emma get ready. Here, remember to reapply this sunscreen every 2 hours. And if you get hungry, eat this sandwich. The doorbell rang, and Laura went to answer it. Her mother Helen, father Frank, and Christy were standing there. Good morning, Laura, Helen smiled. Her expression was softer than usual. Good morning. Please take good care of Emma, Laura said nervously. This bag has everything she needs. Please apply sunscreen every 2 hours. And absolutely do not let her eat any of the foods on this list because she's allergic. Helen rolled her eyes. Laura, we raise children too, you know. No need to worry so much. Frank honked the car horn. We need to leave soon or we'll get caught in traffic. Christy took Emma's hand. We're going to have a wonderful day. Emma waved energetically. Bye, Mom. I'm going now. I'll bring back seashells. Laura hugged Emma tightly. Have fun, Emma. Call me right away if anything happens. I'll definitely be back before dark. As she watched the car drive away, a wave of anxiety crossed Laura's chest. But she told herself she was overthinking and prepared for work. The client meeting ended earlier than expected. The presentation was a success, and it seemed the contract with Twilight Cosmetics was virtually secured. Her boss Martin patted her shoulder and said, "Well done." At 6 p.m., Laura dragged her tired body back to her apartment. She was looking forward to hearing Emma's stories. She felt relieved to see her parents' car in the parking lot. Turning the key and opening the door, she heard laughter from the living room. She could also hear the TV. But Emma's high-pitched voice was nowhere to be heard. I'm home, Laura called out as she entered the living room. Her mother, father, and Christy were sitting on the sofa watching TV. Emma was nowhere to be seen. Laura's heart began to race. Where's Emma? Oh, Laura. Finished work already? Her mother said casually. Where's Emma? Where is she? Laura looked around, wondering if Emma might be in the bathroom or kitchen. Emma? Her mother seemed to think for a moment, then suddenly widened her eyes and said, Oh, I forgot. How terrible. Her mother covered her mouth and began to giggle. Christy also burst into laughter. I can't believe you actually forgot. The blood drained from Laura's face. What do you mean? Her father didn't look up from his newspaper, merely saying, "She was such a quiet child, I didn't notice." What are you saying? Where did you leave Emma? Laura shouted. Her voice was trembling. At the beach, of course, her mother shrugged as if she had simply forgotten an item. Everyone was tired, and we took our eyes off her for a bit before getting in the car. And then something broke inside Laura. How can you laugh? You left a 6-year-old child alone at the beach. Christy crossed her arms and said, "You're being dramatic. Emma's a smart kid, she'll be fine." Laura grabbed her car keys with shaking hands. Her entire body trembled with anger and fear. Are you all insane? What if Emma is in danger? No one answered seriously. Her mother continued to smile. Her father flipped through his newspaper, and Christy looked at her smartphone. Laura rushed out the door and jumped into her car. Her hands shook so much she could barely insert the key. Her mind went blank with only Emma's image in her thoughts. St. Joseph Beach normally takes an hour and a half to reach. Laura ignored the speed limit and drove at breakneck speed. The sky was gradually darkening. Around 7:30 p.m., as dusk was falling, Laura arrived at St. Joseph Beach. There were only a few cars in the parking lot, and the beach was almost deserted. A strong wind was blowing, and the sound of waves echoed ominously. "Emma!" Laura shouted as she ran across the sand. There was no response. Only the sound of waves and wind came back to her. For more than 30 minutes, Laura ran around the entire beach. The sun had set, and it was beginning to get dark. A sense of despair overcame her. Then, she spotted a small shadow in the rocks near the pier. There sat Emma, hugging her knees, shivering and crying. Her face was covered in sand, her skin sunburned, her lips dry, and her eyes streaming with tears of fear. "It's okay. Mommy's here now." Laura rushed over and embraced her daughter. "Mom. I was scared, everyone disappeared. I called out, but nobody came," Emma said between sobs. "How long have you been here?" Laura held Emma's cold hands tightly. "I was building a sand castle with Grandma and them, then they said they were going to get a snack, told me to wait, but they never came back." It turned out Emma had been left alone for more than 4 hours. She was badly sunburned, had nothing to drink, and was exhausted from hunger and fear. Laura took her daughter to the car, wrapped her in a blanket, and gave her water. Emma's body was cold and trembling. Just imagining the terror a 6-year-old child had experienced alone in the darkness made Laura's heart feel like it was about to burst. Holding Emma in the car, anger and determination grew in Laura's heart. "It's okay now, Emma. Mommy will protect you. I won't ever let those people see you again." Emma gradually began to calm down in her mother's arms. However, the shadow of fear in her eyes did not seem likely to disappear easily. "Mom, why didn't Grandma and them come back? Did I do something bad?" Those words shattered Laura's heart. "No, Emma. You didn't do anything wrong. Grandma and them did something wrong." Laura kissed Emma's forehead and vowed never to let her experience such pain again. Laura took Emma to a local emergency medical center. The doctor's diagnosis was mild dehydration, sunburn, and psychological shock. The attending physician spoke in a low voice to Laura. "I understand the child was abandoned alone at the beach. Could you explain the situation in detail?" After Laura explained the situation, the doctor frowned. "This is clearly child abandonment. We may need to report this to the police." While Emma was being treated, Laura called her parents and Christy. Her voice was ice cold. Emma is in the hospital. Come immediately. Otherwise, I'll report this to the police. 30 minutes later, her parents and Christy arrived at the hospital. Emma was sleeping under sedation. The confrontation in the hospital waiting room was tense. Explain yourselves, Laura's voice trembled. How can you be laughing? Emma was left alone at the beach for more than 4 hours. Frank crossed his arms and said, "It was an accident. Not intentional." Helen waved her hand making excuses. Everyone was tired. We thought Emma was with us. Christy looked at her nails and said, "You're always so overprotective." We thought she'd be fine on her own for a bit. Laura was stunned by their attitude. There was not a word of apology, nor any sign of accepting responsibility. This is an accident. What would you have done if Emma had been taken into police custody, or kidnapped, or drowned? No one answered seriously. Her mother continued to smile. Her father turned the pages of his newspaper, and Christy looked at her smartphone. Laura asked the hospital security to escort them out. Please stay away from Emma for now. Even after such treatment, you don't think you've done anything wrong. That week, Laura took time off work to care for Emma. Emma suffered from nightmares and became extremely afraid of being alone. They visited a child psychologist, and Emma began trauma counseling. Laura's friend Jessica came to visit and listen to the story. Laura, this isn't just an accident. There seems to be some intention behind your parents' and Christy's actions. Since childhood, I've been the troublemaker of the family. But Emma too. Laura cried. Tell me about the past, Jessica said. Laura began to talk about memories she had suppressed for years. The neglect and criticism during childhood. How Christy was always given special treatment, while her own successes were constantly belittled. The cold attitude at her wedding and the "you brought this on yourself" comment during her divorce. The indifference toward Emma. They don't not love you, they're jealous and angry that you've succeeded, Jessica said. Laura began to reflect on her life and understand her family's behavior patterns. A few days later, she received an apologetic email from Christy, but it contained the words, "But you're partially to blame too." Laura made a decision. I can't let them hurt Emma and me anymore. She consulted with attorney Sarah Johnson to explore legal options. This is clearly child abandonment. There are grounds to report this to the police, but are you prepared for a complete break with your family? Laura thought it over for a night and decided to make a plan. Emma's psychological counselor advised, Emma's recovery requires safety and stability. The relationship with her grandparents is hindering that. Laura reviewed old diaries, photos, and letters, collecting evidence of long-standing family issues. At the same time, she completely cut off contact with her parents and enhanced her home security system. They have controlled my life. But I won't let them have that power anymore, Laura told her lawyer. 2 weeks passed without any contact from her parents. It came to light that Frank and Helen were telling old friends in their hometown that Laura is overreacting and cutting off contact. Christy was posting sarcastic comments about Laura's overprotectiveness on social media. Laura, together with Jessica, visited her parents' home to attempt a dialogue. Initially, her parents and Christy criticized her exaggerated reaction rather than apologizing. When Laura calmly asked, what was the real reason for leaving Emma behind, silence fell. Frank finally revealed his true feelings. You've always been more successful than Christy. Always perfect, climbing up on your own. Never relying on us, becoming better than us. And your daughter seemed like she'd turn out the same way. We just wanted to teach her some humility. Helen continued, you live so well even after your divorce. Without our help. That was so irritating. Christy admitted her jealousy, saying, "You were always special. Always the center of attention." I just. Laura was shocked, but also felt relief at finally knowing the truth. "So you put Emma in danger because of your jealousy and resentment toward me?" As her family fell silent, Laura quietly stood up. "I came here today to give you one last chance. But it seems that's not necessary." Laura left the house, determined to cut ties with her family. Jessica followed silently. Getting into the car, Jessica finally spoke. "They won't change. For your and Emma's happiness, it's better not to be involved with them anymore." Laura gripped the steering wheel. "I'll do anything to protect Emma." That day, she resolved to truly leave her family behind. Upon returning home, Laura formulated a final action plan. Although Emma's condition was gradually stabilizing, she still suffered from nightmares. Laura wrote 10 sanctions in her notebook and resolved to carry them out. She began with severing the relationship. Working with her lawyer, she created an official, no-contact notice. She submitted a contact prohibition list for her parents and Christy to Emma's school and extracurricular activity venues. She changed the locks at home and installed security cameras. "This is Mommy's decision, Emma," Laura gently explained to her daughter. "We won't be seeing Grandma and them for a while. They hurt Mommy and Emma." Emma looked at Laura with big eyes. "Did Grandma and them forget about me?" "They didn't forget, they deliberately left you behind. That's unforgivable." Next, she canceled the previously promised assistance plan for her parents' old age. She created documents regarding future care, sending them with the sarcastic note, "In case I forget." She forgot to send invitations to Emma's 7th birthday party to the entire family. She removed them from her Christmas card mailing list. Carefully choosing her words, she posted about her experience on social media. Under the theme, "Why child safety should be the top priority," she stated the facts without naming names. The post garnered much sympathy and support, sparking discussion about the dangers of child abandonment. There are times when children are endangered by family members they trust. In such times, we must make strong decisions. She withdrew her rightful share from the family joint educational fund account and transferred it to Emma's new education fund. She secured the funds legally through her lawyer. She sent bills for Emma's counseling and psychological distress medical expenses to her parents. She continued to send them regularly every month, keeping a record of unpaid bills. She formally reported the child abandonment to the local child protective services. An investigation began, and her parents and Christy lost standing in their local community. Their position at church was also compromised. Through her lawyer, she formally requested to be excluded from her parents' will, along with Emma. She included the clear message, "We are not family, so we have no intention of relying on your inheritance." She deliberately forgot her parents' 45th anniversary. Later, she sent only a brief message saying, "I forgot." Finally, she demanded through her lawyer the return of jewelry and mementos inherited from her maternal grandmother. She requested the digitization of photos of herself and Emma from family photo albums, after which she asked for the physical photos to be returned. Her parents were furious upon receiving the formal documents from the lawyer. Frank made an angry phone call, but Laura responded calmly. "These are the consequences of your actions. The price for putting Emma in danger." Helen sent a message through a mutual acquaintance saying, "We should forgive each other as family," but Laura did not respond. Christy portrayed herself as a victim abandoned by her sister on social media, but many people who had seen Laura's post knew the truth. Even in her parents' church community, their reputation as good grandparents began to waver. As the Child Protective Services investigation began, her parents and Christy started receiving frequent summons. At Laura's workplace, her boss and team members supported her decision. "You don't need to forgive anyone who threatens your child's safety, even if they're family," her boss's words encouraged Laura. Laura began psychological therapy, confronting the family trauma she had carried for years. Emma's ex-husband James, upon learning of the situation, offered to cooperate in Emma's psychological support. "I'll do everything I can as a father for Emma." "I support your decision too," James said. Laura's friends supported her and Emma as chosen family. Everyone gathered for birthdays and holidays, spending warm times together. With the help of her psychologist, Emma gradually recovered and stopped fearing the beach. Laura joined a support group for child abuse survivors and learned from others' experiences. She gained a new understanding that blood ties do not define family. 6 months later, Emma was able to play with friends at school and sleep peacefully at night. "Mom, today Sally invited me to her birthday party. It's a beach party. Can I go?" "Of course, Emma. This time Mommy will go with you." Moved by Emma's courage, Laura was determined to overcome her fears and build a new life. A year later, the Child Protective Services investigation was completed, and an official warning was recorded against her parents and Christy. Laura's social media post was shared among many parents as a child safety awareness article. Rumors circulated that Frank and Helen's 45th anniversary party was a sad affair, with many friends suddenly busy and unable to attend. Christy lost reputation at her workplace and missed an opportunity for promotion. Laura successfully completed a major project at the advertising agency and was promoted. Emma's 8th birthday party was attended by many friends and chosen family, celebrating joyously. As a final sanction, Laura sent a short letter to Frank and Helen. "Recently, Emma and I spent a wonderful day at the beach where you abandoned her. She is no longer afraid. We have moved forward. Without you. Laura." After sending this letter, Laura felt complete release for the first time. During a picnic with Emma, Laura said, "We are a strong family of two. A real family consists of people who love and protect each other." At Emma's words, "Mom, I'm happy," Laura smiled with tears in her eyes. Their new life had finally truly begun. 5 years later, Laura was looking out the window of her office. Chicago's skyline was bathed in the sunset, spreading a beautiful orange scene. A nameplate reading, "Executive Director," gleamed on her desk. After the success of a major campaign, Laura had been promoted to executive director at the advertising agency. Though the responsibilities were heavier, the job satisfaction and stable income brought great peace of mind to her and Emma's lives. "May I knock?" Laura smiled at the low voice from beyond the door. "Come in, Michael." Michael Baker was a tall architect with kind eyes. They had met at a charity event 2 years ago and had been engaged for 6 months. He had built a good relationship with Emma, and they were gradually creating a new family form. "Can you leave early today?" "Emma's swim meet starts at 7, Michael said. "Yes, I'm just finishing up." "Let's go together." Emma had grown into a healthy, bright girl. Having overcome the beach trauma, she was now the ace of her school's swim team. Laura was amazed by her daughter's strength every day. "I'm truly amazed by Emma's strength and resilience," Laura often told friends. "She overcame difficulties and turned them into strength." Meanwhile, Frank had been repeatedly hospitalized for health issues. After a heart attack, he needed major surgery and had fallen into a state requiring care and support. Helen was exhausted from caring for her sick husband alone and was isolated in the community. Former friends had gradually distanced themselves after hearing the story of abandoning their granddaughter. Christy refused to care for her parents, prioritizing her own life. Without financial support from her parents, she was forced to become financially independent for the first time. All three blamed each other, and family relationships deteriorated further. Frank's medical and care expenses rapidly consumed their savings, and they eventually had to move into an expensive nursing home, but there were few visitors. One night, as Laura was helping Emma with her homework, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello, this is Laura Collins." "Laura." It was her mother's voice, which she hadn't heard in a long time. "Your father is critically ill. He says he wants to see you one last time." Laura was momentarily speechless. She hadn't had any contact with her parents for 5 years. "I'll think about it," she answered briefly and hung up. That night, after Emma went to bed, Laura discussed it with Michael. "What are you going to do?" Michael gently asked. "Honestly, I don't know. They put Emma in danger." But the next day, Laura talked with Emma. "Grandpa is sick. He might pass away soon. Mommy is thinking of going to see him. What do you think?" Emma thought seriously with a grave face. "I don't want to take care of them, but I think it's okay to say a final goodbye." Laura visited Frank's hospital room. She wasn't expecting an emotional reunion. In the hospital room, Frank said in a weak voice, "So you didn't forget." Laura calmly replied, "Just as you didn't forget me, I haven't forgotten what you all did to Emma." Helen tearfully asked, "Won't you forgive us?" "Forgiving and forgetting are different things. I forgive you. But you can never enter our lives again." Christy was waiting in the hallway, but when she met Laura, she said sarcastically, "So you came after all. This completely ends our relationship. After father passes away, don't contact me at all," Laura told her. Christy objected, "In the end, aren't you the same? Abandoning family when they're in trouble." "I don't abandon family when they're in trouble. That's why I cherish Emma. You all abandoned a 6-year-old child without hesitation even when you weren't in trouble. That's the difference," Laura said as she left. Frank passed away a week later. Laura did not attend the funeral. Instead, she held a small memorial ceremony with Emma at the beach. "Grandpa did something wrong, but he lived his own way, didn't he?" Emma said. "Yes. But we chose a different way to live." As time passed, contact from Helen and Christy completely ceased. As a final sanction, Laura only sent a blank condolence flower with the words, "I forgot," written on it to the funeral home. For her wedding with Michael, she did not invite Helen or Christy, celebrating only with her chosen family. Emma participated holding a bouquet along with Michael's nieces. As Emma grew, she developed a strong value that family is not defined by blood ties, but by love. She won first prize in her school's essay contest with the theme, "What is a Real Family?" Laura compiled her experiences into a book. Published under the title, The Abandoned Heart, How to Rise from Family Trauma, the book became a bestseller, giving courage and hope to many people. She also began to work as a spokesperson for a child abuse prevention organization and was invited to many speaking engagements. What I want to say in conclusion is that a true family consists of people who do not hurt you. Love is protection and respect. That's what Emma and I have learned, Laura said in an interview. The boy born to her and Michael was now 2 years old. Their family was bound not by blood, but by choice and love. One summer day, Laura visited St. Joseph Beach with Emma, her brother, and Michael. In what was once a place of fear, Emma now played confidently with the waves. "Look, Mom," Emma called from the sea. "I'm not afraid." Laura smiled with tears in her eyes. They had walked a long road. recovered from trauma, found new happiness. That terrible day had made them stronger. And above all, it had taught them the true meaning of family. Laura and Emma's story became a catalyst for many people to consider the true meaning of family bonds. It's not about blood ties, but unconditional love and protection, and the promise to never forget each other.